Mana System, Hello, World. By M.J. Markgrove. Chapter 61, Biloxi. Bella was able to keep up with the slower pace that the quads had to travel, the road too rough to go any faster. I asked Martin how long the trip would take. Not sure, this will be our first trip since the world went to shit. I looked at the man, expecting him to be joking. He wasn't. I groaned, but it wasn't like I had anything better to do. We ran into a few wandering monsters. I let the others handle them for the most part, only involving myself if the creature became dangerous. Paul, why don't you fight the monsters? No point, plus you three need to level more than I do. Wait. How do you know we're at a lower level? A skill I picked up called Identify. There are other variants of the skill, but you should be able to pick up one in the bazaar if you are interested. So many things that we don't know, Martin said with a frown. The only advice I can really give is, experiment, try new things and maybe you will learn something new. Thanks, we will endeavor to do that. We exited the swampy area around Armen and started back across the desert. According to Martin, it was faster this way. We stayed towards the transition from swamp to desert for the most part. The ground was hard enough that Bella's speed didn't suffer too much. The quads had to slow us to not leave us behind. Martin offered to have me ride the quad, but I declined. Bella had been cooped up long enough, let her enjoy the run and the freedom. The trip took most of the afternoon, but we got lucky, Biloxi was still in the same location. As we neared the city we could see people going about their day. A few armed groups patrolled around the city. One group stopped us. Haul up, state your business. I decided to check the group while Martin talked with them. None of them was over level 9. I did see one man's eyes go wide as he looked at me. He elbowed his buddy and whispered something in his ear. The man interrupted the conversation between Martin and the third man. What brings such a high-leveled person such as yourself to our humble neck of the woods? I was going to ignore the man's question, but his tone told me, not answering or answering wrong may be seen in a poor light. I sighed, just helping some friends, why does it matter? So, where are you from then? Judging by your level it was some place that saw a bunch of fighting. Chicago and north of there, and yes, there was a lot of fighting. 3 groups were trying to claim the city for their own. And you belonged to one of these groups? No, I said, gritting my teeth. I didn't want to answer this next part, I was a slave. So how? The man started to say before I interrupted him. Look, I'm done explaining my situation, are we free to continue? I responded, my voice tinged with anger. Watch your tone, boy. The man said, putting his hand on his sword. His friend held him back before the situation could devolve any further. The one who had talked to Martin spoke up, I see no reason to turn you nice folk away. Mind your manners in town though. I pushed Bella forward and past the group of men. She let out a clicking hiss at the one that reached for his sword earlier. I smiled, giving her a reassuring pat on the side. The others followed behind me as I led the way into town. Unlike Armen, there was no wall surrounding Biloxi. It was just too large of a city to wall it off, hence the groups of armed people patrolling. As we got farther into the city I started to see telltale signs of a bazaar being nearby. Small stalls with creatures not of earth dotted the sides of streets. I didn't see anything quite as odd as when I visited the bazaar in Chicago though. I saw a centaur, some elves, a few dwarves, along with some other humanoid species I didn't have a name for. It was still an experience for me, seeing these new species, but it floored the other 3. All of the races seemed to be getting along. Maybe people finally figured out how useless their petty differences were in the face of the apocalypse. It was too bad it didn't stop people from being greedy or looking for power over others. But people were people, so that wasn't likely to change. A few more blocks down we spotted the bazaar. Well, here it is, ready to head inside. The other 3 nodded and we rode inside. Once through, the others looked around in wide-eyed amazement. You weren't lying, this place is huge. I was expecting something the size of a superstore, Martin said. Well, where should we go first? The 3 turned to each other and discussed what they needed and how many credits they had. Can you take us to where they sell mana engines? I can certainly find out where they are sold. I looked around at this bazaar. It was more reminiscent of the one in the Fox Valley as opposed to the one in Chicago. All of the stalls looked to be temporary structures. I went up to one of the stalls and asked the elf if she could point me in the direction of someone who sells mana engines. I could, but how does that help me? Well, what do you sell? Clothing and trinkets mainly. I could use some new clothes. Got anything that would fit me? She showed me an assortment of clothing, but nothing sized to fit a human. She refused to give me any information without purchasing anything, so I just walked away. Someone would know. While I imagined it was better for merchants new to the bazaar, I much preferred the more permanent designed bazaars, at least those had signposts. We talked to 10 other people before one was nice enough to point us in the direction of a shop. Look, fellas, I thought this was going to be a different sort of bazaar. Since this one is one of the temporary styles, I'm not going to be much help with finding what you need. If it works like the one I visited before, items tend to be grouped. So when you find one merchant selling the item you want, there may be more nearby. No problem, Paul. Should we just meet you outside? Yeah, just head back to the portal. I have some things I need to get, so I will meet you there when I am finished. The three rode off, getting odd looks from some as they drove their quads. While they were busy finding what they needed, I headed off to find a blacksmith. I walked into the nearest smithy I found. This one was run by a dwarf with arms thicker than my legs. "AI, what can I do for ye? I'm wondering if you can take a look at some armor I have and see if it's reparable." "AI, can take a look, name's Vorgo." "Nice to meet you, Vorgo, I'm Paul," I said, pulling out my Mage Bane armor. The man looked it over with a calculating eye, examining the broken pieces of mithril before he harumphed. "Why, idiot modified THA plates after they were shaped, without magically quenching them. That idiot would be me." "The broken plates are a complete loss, might be able to melt, and recast them, but that would be time-consuming and pricey. Best to just make some new pieces." "What about the unbroken pieces?" "They need to be removed and magically stabilized for the mithril to work properly." "I could do it, or you could find an enchanter that might be able to. Can you quote me a price?" Vorgo started counting the plates while mumbling numbers. "AI could do it for 600 credits. If you wanted to save a few hundred, you could drill out the rivets yourself. This not include the new plates, those cost you 50 credit apiece." Let me think on it. "Do you make weapons at all?" "AI, what sort of weapon you have in mind?" I pulled out my staff and handed it to him. "AI, see, it's had better days. You want same or different? What material holds up best against skills?" Most of the damage to the staff was from me stacking too many skills on it at once. "Mithril, always best for THA. Not good for main portion of staff though," the dwarf said, pausing to stroke his beard. "IGA no wood more capable THA your Eldar wood staff, bone I got." "Bone? AI, most large creatures steeped in mana, bone is much more resilient. Mithril is a bit light, can it be mixed with a heavier metal to form an alloy?" "It can, will lose some of the properties mithril be known for but shouldn't affect it too much." "You want tungsten mix or something denser?" "Something denser would be nice, I was also doing away with the blade. While nice, it didn't hold up well to my style of fighting, despite what old man Trumbo said. Something denser would be good, can you add something for piercing, on each end?" "Ya no want blade?" "No." "Fair," the man replied. He pulled out a piece of paper and sketched a design. I nodded in approval. "Ya lookin' at 2,000 for the staff?" I cringed at the price, care for some trade? "AI, maybe." I showed him what I had to offer. He wasn't interested in Charla's old armor, but he said it was decent quality and an armorer might buy it. I decided not to offer him the slave collars, there was no telling how he would react to seeing them. The only other items of value I had were the mana heart I got from the Sand Devourer and storage rings. The rest I didn't want to sell. I eventually traded him the old mana heart to fix up my armor, replace the damaged plates, and carve a new plate with a larger socket for my larger mana heart. That included the cost of replacing all the rivets. For 2 of the staff, I had to trade him all 6 of my small storage rings, plus 1,000 credits. I'm sure he got the better end of that deal by far. I really should find out how much storage rings go for. I watched as he expertly popped the old mana heart out of the armor, catching it in his hand. He looked at it with a toothy smile before it disappeared into a storage item. He moved over to his bench and pounded out 4 mithril plates to replace the 3 broken ones and the one I was going to replace in the center. In less than 10 minutes he handed me the 4 plates. They were already cool to the touch. "Take bout a day to finish the rest. AI be here same place on the morrow. You need to bring those 4 back so AI can stabilize 'em like the rest." I nodded as I left the shop with his locator token. I wandered around a bit looking at other wares until I came across a shop selling messaging plates. I asked the creature behind the counter if they could send messages to someone you have never met. It set 3 colored plates on the table, silver for bonded, blue for known, black for unknown. Which would you like? How much for a blue? 100 credits. I decided to purchase 2 of the blue plates. I wanted to send Frotzar a message, now I had something to do it with. After another few minutes of walking around, I found someone willing to purchase Charla's armor. I didn't get much, only 400 credits, but I was glad to be rid of it. I also picked up a few basic wooden staffs for experimentation purposes. With my shopping completed, I rode to the exit. Chapter 62, Failed Attempts. It was about an hour before the others returned, riding out from the portal. They seemed happy, so that was a good sign. I walked up to them after they stopped. Well, how did the shopping go? Martin turned to me. Oh hey, Paul, it went well. This place really does have everything. I don't see any items, so I assume you guys bought storage rings. Yep, for the price, they were worth it. Got us 3 mana generators as well, plus a few other things. You ready to head back? We want to get these mana engines installed as soon as possible. No, I have to stay for the night, one of my purchases takes some time to complete. Well, you're more than welcome to come back to Armin, another able body is always welcome. The other 2 nodded. You know, I think I just might. I'll see you guys in a few days. I plan to explore the area a bit before heading back. Alright, Paul, stay safe, Martin said with a grin. You 3 as well. The 3 rode off towards the desert. At least without me, they would make better time. I hopped on Bella and meandered around Biloxi until I found a hotel. It wasn't much, just a single-floor economy-style hotel. After paying the attendant 5 credits, I took my room key and headed across the parking lot. The room wasn't much to talk about. It sported a dated 80s style motif with a coin-operated bed. The room still stank of old cigarette smoke and body odor mixed with strong cleaning chemicals. I plopped down on the bed, the springs giving a tired squeak as they groaned under my weight. Fiona chose that time to materialize. Why not stay somewhere nicer? I don't have to worry about Bella wrecking as much in here. Speaking of, I pulled Bella out of her crate. She wandered around the room sniffing at stuff. Eventually, she found a comfortable spot to lay down. Her sharp claws not adding any improvements to the carpet. Oh well, it needed to be replaced anyway. Fair enough, I'm going to float around and explore. See you in the morning. I nodded at Fiona as she faded from view. I pulled out the basic staff I purchased and set them on the bed. After pulling the old coffee table closer, I got to work figuring out what runes I wanted to place on my new weapons. While looking through my books, I found something interesting. I was surprised this was the only book that covered the subject. Turns out reversed runes had a completely different meaning or meanings. I wondered if this would apply to the runes I got from the kin as well. I pulled out my bucket of scrap metal. I needed to get some more, it came in quite handy for testing one-offs. I carved the rune in reverse on the plate, making sure its effect was tied to the plate. After I finished, I checked my results. The plate shrank and I smiled. I could make my staff/mace if I wanted to now. After flipping through books, I chose to go with an interlocking knot design. At first glance, it appeared to be one continuous knot, but upon closer inspection, it was 2 knots locked together. This should allow me to get the dual effects I was after. After I threw my first failed attempt across the room, I had to rethink my choice in design. Carving on a flat piece was easy, but having to carve the design on a tube was a bit more of a challenge. I could simply just mirror the design on the opposite side, but that felt lazy to me. Instead, I came up with a triple linked knot that wrapped around the circumference, linking in an unbroken chain all the way down the staff. Now I needed to think of the runes I wanted. Elemental was off the table, I could do that with Imbue. Added damage was a possibility, but with the added weight of the material, Vorgo was crafting, I wasn't sure that was needed either. I had to think about what I wasn't able to do. One thing that came to mind was my lack of ability to harm the specters that attacked me. A rune that could help with that would be nice. Too bad Fiona wasn't here, if she were I could test a sample plate with her. I searched through the runes and picked out a few that might give me the effect I wanted. I had to reuse some of the plates I had already carved runes into for testing purposes. I chose the reverse Rado rune for its death meaning, Laguz for life energy, and perth for hidden things. Somehow the act of carving or my intent solidified the desired meaning into the runes. At least that was my assumption, otherwise, each set of runes would have wildly different effects. My first attempt was a bust, the piece laying across the room where I had tossed it. My fingers were still black from where they touched the metal. My combination had turned the plate into something able to suck the life force directly out of anything it touched. Good to know but extremely dangerous. I waited for my fingers to heal from rejuvenate before I walked over to the plate of death. I wrapped it in a piece of cloth before I put it into my ring, making sure not to touch it again. I changed up the order of the runes, finally getting a result. Runic metal plate, spiritual siphon. Incorporeal beings are unaffected by damage as they have no physical body. This set of runes allows you to pull out their life force, effectively causing them damage. Yet, I wasn't going to test this on Fiona. That covers one weakness I had. Now, I could add another effect to my staff or increase the first effect. I came across another interesting combination of runes, deciding to test those out. Runic metal plate, blinding pain. These runes cause 2 seconds of blindness as well as searing pain. I tested the effect by slicing my arm. That was a mistake. After my vision returned, I found myself lying on the floor. I quickly healed the cut and stood up. That was definitely an effect I was going to add. It did require mana to activate those, so I needed to find a control rune. I certainly didn't want it activating every time I touched something, it would drain my mana way too quickly. I settled on Yura's, which had 2 distinct designs. The one I chose looked like an angled doorway and stood for gateway. The other one and Guz stood for work. I added these to the blinding pain runes. When I tested it again, it didn't activate or pull mana from me. I fed some mana into the rune and cut myself a 3rd time. This time the effect activated. I was prepared for it now and managed to not fall on the floor. When the pain faded away, I started carving the design into my staff. Spiritual siphon, blinding pain, and the shrink effect. I had to add separate activation runes for the shrink and a touch rune to make sure I wouldn't accidentally activate it while I powered the other rune. The work took me most of the night to finish. The lack of sleep didn't bother me, I had gotten used to going a few days without adequate sleep at this point. I looked at the finished wooden staff in my hand. Shrinking staff. Quality, average. Damage as staff, 8 to 12 bludgeoning / spiritual siphoning x 1.5 critical damage. Damage as mace, 5 to 7 bludgeoning / spiritual siphoning x 1.05 critical damage. A simple wooden staff engraved with runic enchantments to cause blindness, pain, and strike out at the ethereal. A separate enchantment allows the staff to shrink down to half its length. Not the most impressive weapon in the world. I would need to add the shrinking runes to one of the capped ends when I got my other staff. I noticed the weight of the staff didn't change when it shrunk. I practiced with the staff for a bit, getting a feel for it and causing it to shrink and extend as I moved through fighting forms. The effect wasn't instantaneous, but in a little over a second the staff could shrink from its full length. Since the shrink rune activated through mana when I stopped powering it, the staff shot back to its previous size much quicker than it shrank. So much so, that I felt the recoil in my arms. My practice was interrupted by a screeching noise. I looked over to see the teleportation scrambler vibrating and pulsing. I ran over and turned it off before I woke the whole complex. As soon as the device shut down, I heard something fall against the door. I stored my test staff and pulled out my war staff. I activated a few buffs and wrenched the door open. Groaning on the ground was one of the men from this morning. He must have tried to teleport into my room and the device incapacitated him. I looked around and saw nobody. I dragged the man inside and closed the door. I didn't know what the man wanted, and I didn't care. Before he recovered, I pressed my hand to his neck and cast Calcifying Strike. His eyes went wide as he struggled to breathe. At one point he reached for his sword. I kicked his hand out of the way. The whole time Bella just watched on in boredom. Even the screeching of the item had only been enough for her to be alert for trouble. Now that she saw I had it well in hand, she lay back down. After the man blacked out, I cleansed the ability. Sure, I could have let him suffocate to death, but to what purpose? That would bring scrutiny on me if he told anyone where he had gone. If I didn't need to come back to this city for the bazaar, I might think differently, but it was this man's lucky day. I stuffed him into Bella's storage crate, which got a hiss of approval from the beast. I'll be back in a few minutes, wait here. I opened my door and looked around again to make sure it was clear. Slipping out unnoticed, I walked a few blocks until I found a nice smelly dumpster. I unloaded the unconscious man into the bin and shut the lid. Maybe now he would think twice about breaking into people's rooms. With that business done, I headed back to my room to sleep for a few hours. Gran, are you sure this is safe? Monique said, fidgeting while her Gran drew a blood circle on the ground. Hush child, your Gran knows best. Monique had told her Gran about the spirit she encountered the previous night. Her Gran was a spirit binder and could bind spirits to her will. It was a risky spell though and required blood. Gran was too old to provide her own, so Monique had to supply the blood, or so Gran had told her. The whole ritual made the hairs on her neck stand up and sent a shiver down her spine. She fidgeted again and wanted to ask her Gran a second time if it was safe, but chose not to anger the woman. Gran finished the bloody spell circle. Her foolish granddaughter had given her pure blood to power the ritual. Pure blood was needed to bind higher level spirits. It wouldn't kill the poor thing, but it would leave her in a state of weakness for a few days. That was fine with Gran. Hear me, spirits of beyond. I call forth the spectre that haunts this town. Come forth and be bound to my will. The magical circle glowed a brilliant crimson color before a mist-like barrier sprang into being. Inside floated an apparition of death. Gran smiled. Gran. That's not the one I saw. Hush child, it matters not, it haunted this town, so now it is mine to command. The apparition floating inside the shield tried to reach through the barrier and claw at Gran. It let out an awful wail that was muted by the spell. A large sword appeared in its hand as it hacked at the barrier in rage. Settle, spirit, you are bound to me and will submit to my will. Gran said, strain in her voice. The spirit should have been weakened significantly by the pure blood, how was it still so strong? Child, are you still pure? She asked in a demanding tone. Monique shied away from her Gran's accusatory voice. Gran's eyes went wide in horror. Foolish child, you have doomed us. Just then the apparition carved a chunk of floor out. A hideous smile twisted its dead features as its sword cleaved through the spell form, causing the barrier to dissipate. It was impossible to tell whose scream was more chilling, the undead creatures, or her Gran's. Monique ran, she ran as fast as she could. Her efforts were in vain as a ghostly hand plunged through her chest. The pain wasn't physical, but the coldness of death spread through her body as it hit the ground. The apparition pulled the soul from the dying body, devouring the life essence held within. The husk rose from the ground to seek that which it had lost. The creature screamed in delight as it sensed other sources nearby. Screams echoed in the night as the creature moved through the town, gorging on the essence of life. Chapter 63, Revelation. I didn't get much sleep after my encounter with the guard. Bella was guarding the room, but even then I woke up every hour or so, gripping my staff. When all was quiet I fell back asleep only to repeat this process. Eventually, I gave up on sleeping. Instead, I read through the rest of the books I had been meaning to look at. I learned a few new runes, quite a bit about pagan designs and symbols. The system added them to my knowledge, so they must be able to be used in my rune crafting as well. I especially liked the book about Egyptian hieroglyphics. I had been meaning to spend more time with the book. The Eye of Ra and Horus were of interest. I wanted to be able to make something that would allow me to always see through stealth or effects that hid people. This led me to an odd book I picked up on conspiracy theories and symbolism. Of course, the all-seeing eye was prominently displayed on the cover of said book. It was the main reason I grabbed it from the library in the first place. The all-seeing eye fell under more occult symbolism than anything else, which made me wonder. The image wasn't ancient like the previous ones I had worked with, yet my skill seemed to accept it all the same. Giving it its own description, versus putting it with the Eye of Ra or Horus. I was starting to think that the symbol itself didn't matter as much as the meaning placed on it by people. I was tempted to carve the design into my flesh, but that would be temporary, and who knew if it would work. I would wait until Fiona returned and maybe try it. A few more hours passed while I read. Fiona finally appeared just as the sun was rising. You're up early. Yet, couldn't sleep. Anything interesting around town? For the undead, no. I was more curious about the people and the architecture. The glass-walled buildings are truly something. I forgot she hadn't really seen any impressive buildings while she was alive. The Fox Valley didn't have all that unique architecture, mostly old buildings made in the 40s and 50s. It's too bad she missed out on Chicago. Since you're back, I want to test something. No healing spells, she said adamantly. No, nothing like that. I want to carve a rune into my body and see if I can activate it to spot you while you're invisible. Seems painful, you sure you want to try this? Yeah, a little pain like this is nothing. She went silent at that, remembering the story I told her about my time in Chicago. Fine, but if I think it's causing too much pain, I will stop you. I thanked her for her concern but assured her I would be fine. Now where to carve the symbol? Eventually, I chose to carve it on the back of my hand. I figured if I needed to activate it by touch this might be the best way. If it didn't work or worked differently than I anticipated I would try some other location. I exhaled and quickly carved the design into my hand, gritting my teeth at the pain. Blood welled up from the cuts, trickling down onto the table. I would make sure to clean it up after. Who knew if there were blood magic users around? I sure as hell didn't want to find out. After I finished carving in the design I used rejuvenate to seal the wounds. The cuts scarred over leaving an eye trapped in a pyramid on the back of my hand. Alright, you ready? Yes, Fiona replied, fading from view. I could feel the rune on my hand, it felt odd, not like a tattoo or a scar but like something foreign. Here goes nothing. I willed a bit of mana into the area where the rune was, to see if it would activate that way. Nothing happened. I touched the rune with my other hand and willed the mana through my fingers. This got a response. The scars started to glow a dim blue color, emitting a light that cast the area it was pointed at in an odd color. Fiona, are you still in the same spot? Yes. I turned my hand so the light fell on the area Fiona occupied. When it passed her I could see a strange glowing outline, that seemed to stick to her form. It went away as soon as I pulled the rune away from her location. Well, it seems to work, the resolution could be better but I'm guessing it has to do with the poor quality of the rune. Fiona popped back into view. So you're just going to carve yourself up for a minor advantage? I shook my head, no, more a proof of concept. One of my healing spells will remove the scars anyway so it's pointless to do it. I think tattooing them on might work though. I probably need to use some magical ink though, similar to what they use for enchanting. Well, I guess if it helps I can't really raise too much concern. Just, try not to go overboard, she said sternly. Yes, mother, I said, rolling my eyes. First some food, then we can head back to the bazaar, the items I purchased should be ready. Her face brightened at this news. Did you know, there is a ghost area in the bazaar? Really, what for? No clue, I just saw a bunch of ghosts congregating in one area. Maybe for spirits looking for masters, or for those who wish to commune with the dead. I was too chicken to go over and see. Well, if you do go over, stay safe, I won't be able to protect you. You won't need to, there are guardian spirits there that could turn a level 40 into Swiss cheese in moments. I swallowed at that statement, good to know, don't piss off the ghosts. Martin and the boys rolled up to the outskirts of Armen an hour or so before sunrise. The town was quiet, which was normal at this time of day. They slowed down as Clem held up a hand. They had come to trust the man's instincts, coming to a halt. What's up? Not sure, something feels off. Joshua, get ready, we may have trouble. Joshua got off the quad and started changing his form. He could take on aspects of any creature he killed. He chose to go with a tusked boar, they were tough and mean. After his transformation, he resembled an 8-foot-tall pigman with tusks and wiry hair covering his body. He was still bipedal with normal hands. He produced a heavy axe and a large shield from his new storage ring. They weren't anything special, just much larger than normal, built for larger species. He had basic weapon skills but his abilities improved natural weapons more. Since this form didn't really have anything other than tusks he felt this was a better option. Martin started pulling some bones and dice from his ring, casting them on the ground in front of him. His skills were mostly random but extremely powerful. The dice landed on 666. The bones glowed and grew. A 4-foot bone demon taking shape. That was a new one for him. After the creature took shape, pale flames appeared around it. Martin could feel the connection to the creature, allowing him to control it. Next, he pulled out 3 small bags, giving them shakes. He handed one to each of the guys to hang around their necks. Once worn, a silver shimmer appeared around each of them. The shield would help ward off damage. Martin pulled out one last item, a crow talon wand. He just finished preparing when Clem called out. Incoming, the man said, pulling out his crossbow. The man didn't hesitate, firing into one of the people running at them. Martin could tell something was wrong with the people. They ran in a jerky, inconsistent way. The one Clem shot with his crossbow went down, trampled by the others. Martin fired off a blue bolt from his wand, striking another of the creatures before Joshua bellowed and rushed towards the group. The entire group of what Martin thought of as zombies headed straight for Joshua. I ate the food quickly and headed over to the bazaar to pick up my order. Vorgo had my items ready. "Here you go, ya got those plates for me." I handed him the 4 plates that I finished during the night. Less sleep gave me plenty of time to finish them. "Gimme 5 minutes." I nodded to the man as he headed into his workroom. 5 minutes later he was back out, handing me the fully repaired armor. I thanked the man for his hard work and headed out. I had some carving to do and headed back to my hotel. Fiona joined me about an hour later. "I see you got your new staff. I forgot to ask what abilities you were going to add to them." "Give me 20 minutes and I can show you," I said with a mischievous smile. "For shame, making a woman wait, it better be good." "Oh, it is. Ghastly Harvest. Quality, excellent. Damage as staff, 22 to 45 bludgeoning / piercing / spiritual siphoning x3 critical damage. Damage as mace, 15 to 25 bludgeoning / piercing / spiritual siphoning x 1.5 critical damage. This Strider bone staff is capped with an osmium mithril alloy, engraved with runic enchantments to cause blindness, pain, and strike out at the ethereal. A separate enchantment allows the staff to shrink down to half its length to act like a mace. I ignored the XP notice, instead, admiring the staff. Intricate runework trailed down the staff. One of the capped ends held a few runes as well. A last-minute addition I tested the previous night. This would allow one of the capped ends to shrink, making it look more mace-like, instead of a stick with 2 metal balls on it. Of course, the capped ends weren't round, they were octagonal, made with slight scallops to allow for more force to be placed on a smaller point. Each end now sported a 4-spoke triangular spike that jutted out around 8 inches, made from the same dense material. Holding the staff by the middle caused each end to bow slightly from the weight. That was fine with me, the flexibility actually helped. I noticed Fiona quickly floated away when the staff was complete. "What is that? It feels foul." "Spiritual siphoning," I quickly added. "Why would you make something like that?" "Well, when I fought those specters and couldn't even harm them, it was a wake-up call. Now I'm not certain about this next part, but the effect may also be able to target people with abilities to hide or turn invisible." "You mean like those shadow faction folks you told me about?" "Exactly." "Well, keep it away from me. I thought becoming a specter would make me immune to feeling nauseous, but that staff comes close." "Sounds like a plan. Now check this out." I pressed my thumb to the triggering rune and fed some mana into the staff. I guess I wasn't prepared for the sound. The noise of cracking bones and tortured metal echoed in my hotel room as the staff shrank. The sound sent a shiver up my spine. The wooden test had not done this. When the transformation was complete, I now held a 3-foot-long mace. I gave it a few test swings. The weight had not changed, it had only been compressed. "That sound could wake the dead," Fiona commented. "Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. Either way, it works." I stopped the trickle of mana and the staff shot back to its full length, almost taking my arm out of its socket. "Ow, hell, going to have to get used to that," I said, rubbing my sore shoulder. "Are you done playing?" "Fine, I'll put it away for now. I need to check on my armor anyway." I pulled out my fully repaired Magebane armor and inspected it. Magebane Brigandine. Quality, superb. Armor, 35. Slashing resistance, 60%. Stabbing resistance, 75%. Blunt resistance, 25%. Magic resistance 90%. Elemental resistance 30%. Shield, max charge 400 mana. Made from mithril and wyvern, this armor has inherent magical and elemental resistance. The rune-crafted Tree of Life design combines all of the elements of the armor together, strengthening them. The mana heart set into the tree's roots provides a shield of force that deflects 0.5 damage per mana spent to charge it. Most of the stats saw an increase as well as the quality. And now with the larger mana heart, I could have an even more powerful shield. Fiona floated over to take a closer look. "It's quite lovely." I simply nodded, taking my Trubar armor off to put this set on. I forgot just how nice this armor had turned out. It fit me like a second skin. I quickly powered up the shield, watching the new gem glow. It lent a sinister red glow to the runes on the armor, matching much nicer than the previous green of the smaller gem. Attack me, I want to see if you can penetrate the shield. Are you sure? Yup, I nodded. She didn't have to be asked twice, her ethereal blade appearing in her hand as she stabbed out lightning fast. Ethereal blades hurt. Ow, I said, reeling back from the unblocked blow. It had taken over 100 health off of me, bypassing my armor and shield like it wasn't even there. Are you okay? Fiona asked in concern. Yeah, just surprised is all, I said, casting healing touch. The creeping cold from her strike faded as my non-wound healed. It was weird to be injured by something that technically didn't exist. Well, at least we know I can't take a hit from you while you're incorporeal, try it again, this time as a physical presence. She slashed at me with her blade, having it rebound off my shield, draining it 140 points. Geez, I didn't say to put everything into it, I said, backing away from the crazy woman. She just smiled, how else will you learn its limitations if I don't go all out? Plus this is a little payback for making that creepy staff. Maybe I wouldn't tell her that I plan to copy the design onto my second staff. Yeah, probably best to keep that to myself for now. Chapter 64, Returning to Armen. I rode Bella along the edge of the desert. The transition between zones left enough solid ground that we could traverse it with ease. It wasn't the most direct route, but that was okay. The trip back to the now useless boat dock that Martin and the others used on our first visit took a few extra hours. I spotted a few dust plumes in the distance from sand devourers. They kept well clear of the transition zone, although one shadowed me for a bit before it headed off into the desert. The boat ramp looked odd, jutting into the sand. Bella had no issue climbing up the surface, her claws clicking on the old concrete. When we got to the end of the ramp, she stopped. She made some clicking noises as she searched about. What is it, girl? I asked, producing my staff and looking around as well. Fiona appeared next to me, something feels off. Yeah, Bella feels it too. I hopped off of Bella to give her free rein to fight. This would also free me up. I held off on imbuing my staff until I knew what I was dealing with. I did refresh my other buffs though, and I added impact to my staff. It would be nice to be able to add that back to my arsenal. Suddenly Bella's head arrowed in towards a section of thick vines and small shrubs. Many things burst through the wall of vegetation and started sprinting across the parking lot toward us. Their movements were off. Any idea what we're dealing with? Some sort of undead, Fiona replied in disdain. So, fire it is. I imbued my staff with fire, preparing for the creatures to get close enough to use Identify on. Husk level 7. Husk level 3. Husk level 8. I checked a few more, but all were between level 10 and 3. There were a lot of them though. I cast Earth Fist, changing the spell to form a knee-high wall about 20 feet long. The first husks ran straight into the wall, falling over as the ones behind didn't stop. Bella was hissing and snapping as they got closer. I waited until a large part was within my cone for disruption before I activated the spell. All of the monsters caught within the spell were either killed or knocked to the ground, the fire burned away at their clothing. These must be fresh undead, I said, noting that the bodies didn't combust like zombies or other undead. Bella took this as her cue to attack. She ran in and grabbed one husk by the arm and shook it like a dog shakes a toy before tossing it 20 feet away. At least I thought she tossed it, turns out she just ripped its arm off. Fiona also shot towards the enemies, they ignored her completely. I don't think my attacks are harming them, she said in a panicky voice. Bella, stay clear. I yelled, spinning my staff to activate Eye of the Storm. The creatures ran headlong into my maelstrom of fire and wind, heedless of their own safety. One even managed to make it through before the winds were too strong. It tried to claw and bite at me, but my armor's shield flared up. I booted it in the chest, sending it back into the storm. I kept the spell going for another 5 seconds before I let it end. Ash and burnt corpses fell from the sky, breaking apart upon landing on the ground. A few of the higher-leveled husks survived my spell but were burnt too severely to walk. That didn't stop them from trying to crawl towards me still. Bella ran by and used her sharp back claws to rake their bodies. I decided to let her finish the rest off as I surveyed the area. These aren't normal undead, Fiona said, floating up to me. Why do you say that? I should be able to harm undead, they still have souls, they are just corrupted, these things have no soul. I turned over one of the less crispy corpses with my foot. Fuck, I said quietly. I recognized this man, he was the guy that greeted Martin when we first entered Armen. This doesn't bode well for the town, Fiona said, looking at the corpse. Part of me said just leave, don't get involved, this isn't your fight. I had to work hard to suppress that mindset. Fiona was right, I needed to recapture my humanity if possible. Let's go see if anyone survived, and maybe what caused this disaster. I checked all of the other corpses but didn't recognize anyone. After I stored my staff I mounted Bella and the three of us made our way towards the town wall. The swamp was quiet, eerily so. Usually, there were the ever-present sounds of frogs, bugs, or other animals. Now, there was just silence. It made the area feel oppressive and foreboding. Every nerve in my body said run. I fought off this sensation. Congratulations, you have successfully overcome the effects of an aura of terror, the aura will no longer have any effect on you. I stopped as the sensation lifted from my body and mind, allowing me to think clearly again. That's when the scream came. You have been stunned for 5 seconds by the cry of a true banshee. Bella and I remained motionless as an apparition of pure horror flew at us. Its clothing was torn and stained. In one arm it held a sword much like Fiona's, in the other were 4-inch-long fingernails that came to wicked points. It flew at me with a malicious gleam in its eyes. Fiona flew to intercept it, their ethereal blades clashing as it tried to force itself closer to its prize, me. It managed to rake its claws across my chest a second before the debuff ran out. My heart seized in my chest as I fell backward off Bella. Bella bolted towards the swamp, the terrifying creature too much for her. The pain of the creature's touch was like nothing I had experienced before. It was like the cold of the specters multiplied by 100, but that wasn't all. A feeling of something very nearly being torn from my body left me shivering on the ground. I could still hear the two clashing as it tried to get around Fiona to get to me. I knew if I didn't get up soon I was going to die here. I pulled my staff from my ring and wobbled unsteadily to my feet. My eyes were blurry from the tears streaming from them, but I got off identify anyway. True Banshee level XX. I was having a hard time tracking the two as they kept fading from view and reforming. I decided to activate another use of my talisman. It helped a bit, allowing me to see their forms a bit better when they faded from view. The Banshee managed to knock Fiona off to the side and sped towards me. My throat locked up in terror, but my muscles still responded as I swung my staff at the creature. As soon as my staff came into contact with its wispy outline it let out a cry so powerful my muscles turned to jello and I collapsed on the ground. It shrieked like that the entire time it flew back into the city. Fiona rushed over, "Are you okay?" Was all I could get out, my muscles not yet responding. I was incapacitated for a good 5 minutes. Fiona floated around nervously the entire time. If those husks had returned I would be dead since she had no way to harm them and Bella had run off into the swamp. I hoped she would return safely, but now I had to worry about myself. I wasn't even sure what the Banshee used to attack me, nothing appeared on my HUD. Eventually, the effect wore off and I could move again. I retrieved my muddy staff that had fallen from my limp grip. As I examined the weapon I noticed a slightly glowing bit hanging from the part I struck the Banshee with. I decided to try identifying it. Essence of life. Well, that's not ominous. What? Fiona asked, not getting any closer to my staff. I pulled the diaphanous material from my staff and showed it to her. Never heard of it before. I decided to store the item in my ring, maybe a merchant could tell me what it was or what it was worth. I turned towards the city and blew out a breath. Well, ready for round 2. Are you sure about this? Not even a little, but I want to see if Martin and the others survived, plus it's the right thing to do. Alright, I'll try to keep it occupied so you can strike it again. Your weapon definitely hurt it. Hold up a sec, I said, wandering over and picking some hanging moss from a tree. I mixed it with a bit of mud and shoved the concoction into my ears. It was not the most pleasant sensation, but it should reduce the effectiveness of the Banshee's wails. I gave Fiona a thumbs up as we headed towards the town once more. I checked my combat log to see what sort of damage I had dealt the Banshee. My one strike had hit it for over 500 damage, no wonder it fled. I had gotten extremely lucky and got a critical hit along with impact activating. This also included my bonus of 15% from Light in the Dark, and the 10% for Night of Retribution titles. I had no clue what level this creature was at, but it was easy to tell it was strong. My guess is it was stronger than the Sand Devourer I fought. The only reason Fiona was able to hold it off was its single-minded drive to get at me. I doubted even she would be able to fight it off seriously. The gate to Armen was open, swinging in the light breeze. Dozens of corpses of husks littered the ground around the entrance. We had found a few more down by the quads but no sign of Martin or his friends. There were no signs of Martin, Joshua, or Clem near the gate either. I suppose one of them could have been a corpse I charred beyond recognition. I held out hope that they persevered or managed to escape. I did see a black tar-like substance on the ground that smelled like sulfur and rot. I wasn't sure what that was about, so I stayed well clear of it. Nothing moved within the city as we made our way inside. Fiona had returned to her invisible form. Occasionally I would hear the plaintive wail of the banshee in the distance. It was muted significantly by my impromptu earplugs and only stunned me for a second. The worst was when I heard the gleeful cackling, followed by someone screaming. I stayed my course though. I didn't know where the scream had originated from and I would not be able to get there in time to do anything anyway. No, my goal was the bar where Martin's sister was the last time I met her. As we got closer, Fiona tapped me on the shoulder. I had to pull out one of my earplugs to hear her. There is some sort of barrier up around the bar, it is preventing me from getting any closer. Good, that means there are probably survivors. Can you stay out here and try to lead any other people this way? I can try, but I'm liable to scare them more than lead them. Well, then just scare them in this direction. She nodded, fading from view as she moved off to search. I clutched my staff as I headed towards the bar. I couldn't see this barrier, but I trusted Fiona. I knocked on the door quietly before I announced myself. It's Paul, from the desert. Anyone in there? I heard a few muffled words as someone unbolted the door. Hurry, get inside, someone said, gesturing for me to enter. I squeezed through the gap in the partially opened door. The door quickly shut behind me as it was bolted back into place. 20 people were in the bar, either sitting or standing. They all looked at me expectantly. Martin rushed up and pulled me into a hug with a few slaps on the back. I was a bit thrown off by the unexpected amount of affection. Glad to see you're okay, Paul, we were worried the banshee would get you. What happened? We're not quite sure, Sally said, walking up to join the conversation. How did you survive? She asked in a demanding tone. I see she had dropped the mask of friendliness that she greeted me with the first time we met. Just dumb luck, I replied. Not good enough, she said, producing a sword. Looks like Martin bought his sister a storage ring. My first instinct was to destroy her and be on my way. I suppressed that desire as Martin intervened. Damn it, Sally, tensions are high enough without us fighting each other. But really, Paul, how did you survive? Anyone able to identify items? I asked instead. Martin and Sally both nodded. I decided to take a chance, handing Martin my staff. I had my other one in case things went south. Martin let out a low whistle as he inspected the item, handing it to his sister. You made this? She asked. Yes. Can you make more? I crossed my arms. Why should I? You were ready to gut me a moment ago, now you want my help. Sorry, lady, I have been through too much shit since the world ended to do anything for nothing. I knew I was being a tad unreasonable with the current situation, but I wasn't about to let this woman walk all over me. If we couldn't come to an understanding, it was best to cut my losses and move on. I would still try to take down the creature, but I wouldn't supply these people with rune-crafted weapons. She grit her teeth and shoved the staff back into my hand. Screw you, we can handle this ourselves. Not likely, I replied dismissively, I barely survived my encounter and I had some help. Do you even know what level this creature is? Martin replied before his sister could fly off the handle at me again. No, nobody that has gotten close enough survived. Do you happen to know its level? I don't, but it's over 30, that much I can say for a fact. This brought concerned mutterings from the people now clustered around the three of us. It was starting to make me nervous and I was eyeing each of them as a possible threat. Martin must have seen my discomfort. All right, people, let's make some room so the constable and Paul can discuss terms. The group grumbled but moved away to give us some space. I gave Martin a small nod in appreciation. He must be desperate if he referred to his sister as the constable. What do you want for your help? She asked through clenched teeth. Nothing much. Just an empty home of my choice after this mess is cleared up. That's all. No, I also want a system oath from both of you and anyone else that gets these weapons, stating that they will not disclose my methods, sell, trade, or give away the items unless they get my say-so. Fine, I swear by the laws of the system to not disclose the method used by Paul Fuller to modify items and will not sell, trade, or give away those items without his express consent. Happy. Martin repeated the oath and I felt the binding magic settle on the three of us. What about Clem and Joshua? Martin gave a sad shake of his head. Sorry. I didn't know. It's fine, they went out fighting to save others. Chapter 65, Arming the Locals. After I got the required oaths from the rest of the people in the bar, the constable showed me to an office area where I could work. Her attitude toward me was still chilly but I didn't care. I looked at the assorted weapons before me. It was a motley collection consisting of a few swords that were probably older than my father, a couple of hunting bows with an assortment of arrows, and one warhammer that looked like a cheap knockoff. I sighed. I wasn't even sure if most of the items could hold up to the magic. Ranged weapons would be ideal to deal with this creature, but the arrowheads were the cut-out hunting-style ones, leaving little material for adding the inscription. The shafts of the arrows weren't much better. Most were a carbon, or carbon composite. Good for strength, but any modifications from carving into them would weaken the shafts. That left the aluminum ones. There were about a dozen of those. I would have to be very careful carving the runes into them, the aluminum tubes were really thin. I got to work carving in only the runes for spiritual siphoning. My first attempt ruined one of the aluminum arrows. After that, I was better able to gauge how deep to carve and the last 11 were finished. My attempts to add runes to the screw-on tips failed. There just wasn't enough room for the runes, at least at my skill level. I would just have to hope that the enchantment carried over from the shaft. Even if it didn't, just touching the arrow should harm the creature. I added the same runes to the bows and the one crossbow. Since this was my first time working with ranged weapons, so I didn't know if this would work either. The rest of the weapons went quickly and I finished in under 2 hours. Weapons are done, I said, walking out of the office, one thing before I hand them out. Remember I said I had help? Yet. Sally said. Well, my friend, is a ghost. A spectre actually. I got a few blank looks at my announcement. What do you mean a spectre? Are you in league with the banshee? Sally said, her words getting heated. I wasn't sure how this woman ever made constable with her temper. If you would stop and think for a second you would realize how stupid your questions are. If I were in league with the banshee I wouldn't be here helping you and Armin. Martin had to hold his sister back from doing anything rash. Calm down, Sally, you know he's right. We've seen weirder stuff than a ghost companion since the world ended. If Paul says it can be trusted I think we should believe him. She. Hey, Martin said looking at me. The spectre is a she, and her name is Fiona. So, where is this so-called friend? Sally asked in disbelief. She is seeing if there are any more people to save. Since nobody else has entered the bar since I got here I would guess this is it. Plus there is some sort of magical field protecting the building. That would be my doing, Martin added. I just nodded. Martin and Sally handed out the weapons. It was enough to arm 7 people. I let them choose the best people for the job. I also suggested everyone find something to block their ears from the banshee's attack. It took a bit of work to find things to either cover their ears or plug them, but eventually, everyone was ready. I'll go out first to meet with my friend, I said, loud enough so even the people blocking their ears could hear. Martin had to stay behind because of the shield, but his anger management issue sister was right behind me. We exited the bar and I could hear the banshee wailing in the distance. I quickly made my way to the last location I saw Fiona at. The others waited nervously outside the bar. Fiona, I hissed quietly, having pulled one of my earplugs out. What? I heard her say next to my ear. You can turn visible, I told them about you. You sure? They look awfully jumpy. Yeah, just keep me between you and the group. I did give their weapons the spiritual siphon enchantment. I suppose you kind of had to, not like we could have taken the creature down alone. I nodded and gestured for the others to approach. Some looked at Fiona with fear, others with awe. Fiona just stared back dispassionately. Everyone, this is Fiona, my spectral companion. Well, I'll be damned, she is real. Here I thought you made her up, Constable Sally said. I guess she didn't take her brother's word at face value. Whatever, as long as they didn't try to hurt her, I wouldn't be forced to hurt them in return. Come on, we don't have time for this, we have a town to save, Fiona said, eyeing Sally. Sally laughed, I like her, all business. We ran after Fiona as she led us toward the banshee. We were forced to dispatch a few groups of husks on our way. Well, I was. The others were too hesitant to kill people they once knew. One intersection held the remains of a large battle. Husk bodies littered the space. I counted 45 in total. In the center of the corpses was a body of a large bipedal humanoid with pig-like features. Joshua, Sally said. We'll bury him later, let's keep moving. I pulled my staff from my storage ring as we got closer to the screams. The banshee was wailing on something in frustration. When I peeked my head around the building I saw what it was. 2 people were trapped under a slowly shrinking dome of power that kept the terrifying creature from getting to them. I quickly motioned for the archers. As soon as the archers stepped out from behind the wall, the banshee stopped attacking the dome and turned toward us. It let out its deathly howl and charged. 2 of the archers froze up, their ear protection not enough to defend against the attack. The other 2 got off shots, only one managing to hit the creature. It paused as if stunned that it got hit, the arrow floating in mid-air. It reached around and yanked the offending arrow out, tossing it to the ground. The archer pissed himself and ran. I didn't blame him. The banshee had let out its aura of terror. The other 6 managed to fight off the effects enough not to run. When the 2 archers finally were able to move again, they fired off their shots. Each one struck the creature, sending it into fits of rage. Mist started to form around it as it picked up speed and barreled towards the group. It dodged the next round of arrows as it swiped its sword at one of the unfortunate archers. The man flinched in terror, about to be run through when Fiona blocked the blade. The man had enough time to take a step back and breathe a sigh of relief when his leg shattered. He screamed as he fell to the ground. The mist washing over him before I could get there to save him. When the mist retreated, the man was frozen solid. Don't touch the mist! I yelled. Even with my elemental defense buff, the man had stood no chance. Fiona kept clashing with the creature as we backed away. The mist eventually faded as the spell ended. It was finally time for the melee fighters to move in. I blink stepped in with impact and flurry active. The creature remembered me and took a swipe at me, only to have it blocked by Fiona. I only managed 3 of the strikes from flurry as the banshee's form faded, only to reappear 2 feet farther away. The man with the warhammer was surprised as the creature stuck its hand in his chest and pulled. He tried to swing the weapon, but it fell limply from his hands as the creature pulled out what I could only assume was the man's soul. It shoved the glowing mass into its mouth, causing its wounds to heal. Fiona got there in time to leave a glowing cut on the creature before it retaliated in kind. The 2 moved off as they engaged in combat once more. One of the women with us let out a grief-stricken moan. Sally stopped her from going to the man. She knew what he would turn into. I ran over and stabbed my staff down into the creature. I could hear the woman screaming at me to stop, but there was no way to bring her love back. I rushed toward the battle with Fiona and the banshee. Sally had to drop the inconsolable woman. There were more important issues at hand than one life. She didn't know how Paul could be so clinical about killing someone. Sure, she had helped rid the town of the cartel, but they had been terrorizing them for years. She ran forward, picking up the hammer Simon dropped. She would at least let his death mean something. When she had a clear shot, she whipped the hammer at the banshee. Fiona had to duck out of the way as the enchanted hammer tore through the undead creature and kept going. The banshee arched its back in pain and turned on the town leader. Paul was there to stop its advance with another flurry of blows. The creature wailed in pain and tried to back away, but Fiona was there again, slashing at its unprotected back. Sally joined the fight, stabbing her sword into the creature. Its arm lashed out and grabbed her by the wrist. She let out a pained howl as her wrist started freezing. I lashed my staff down across the banshee's outstretched arm, my attack blowing through the incorporeal form. Sally lurched back and fell to the ground as the banshee screamed and held up its missing arm. It raised its sword to strike me down when an arrow thudded into its head, followed by another. I glanced back to see the mourning woman holding her dead lover's bow. The banshee gave out one last pitiful wail before it faded. I watched the woman's level jump from level 7 to level 10 from this one monster. Even Sally gained a level. I let them loot the remains, although, I did keep another essence of life that got stuck to my staff during the fight. With the creature defeated, I pulled the improvised earplugs out and tossed them to the ground. Fiona had already faded from view. It was probably for the best. No need to remind people with weapons that can harm you that you are also undead. I walked toward the 2 trapped in the dome. It must be soundproof because they didn't hear my tapping. And they had their eyes closed. Sally walked up a few minutes later. Any idea who these 2 are? I asked. She nodded, yeah, they are Clem's wife and kid. Well, I'll leave you to it. Fiona and I will clear up any husks we find around town. She nodded sadly as she looked at the now fatherless family. With Fiona's help, I was able to quickly dispatch husks. She could locate them, even inside buildings, making the job much faster. I stopped in front of a tattoo shop. I examined the building from the outside. It was a 3-story building near downtown. The bottom had the shop and the top 2 floors were apartments. I checked the door and found it unlocked. The inside was covered in dust, nobody had been in here for quite some time. All of the tools still sat in their drawers. Why are we here? Fiona asked. It might make a good house, thought I should check it out. Well, it's empty of husks. I nodded as I walked up the back stairs to the apartments above. It turns out the previous owners had opened up the 2 top floors and made it one large apartment. It was way more than I needed, but I liked it. I would let Sally know when I returned to the bar later. We continued our sweep of the surrounding buildings. More than one had to be cleared of husks. I marked each one with an X on the door. The town had suffered catastrophic losses to one creature. It just proved that the world had changed and there was no true place of safety anymore. I doubted the Fox Valley or even the idiots in Chicago could have dealt with this threat in a reasonable amount of time. If it wasn't for my previous encounter with ethereal undead, I would have been just as dead. I somehow doubted second chance would restore my soul. When I got to the bar, I found it empty. A sign taped to the door read, "All survivors please meet at the hotel." I headed over to the hotel. Turns out more people had survived than I had first thought. The main room was filled with over 100 people. I avoided any conversation as I made my way through the crowd. I stopped toward the side of the room. Sally took in a deep breath as she walked up to the raised platform. It had been originally constructed for small shows or performers hired by the hotel. Now it acted as her podium to address the crowd. "Quiet down, people," she yelled over the din of conversation. She waited for the noise to settle down before she continued. "Our town has suffered another tragedy, but thanks to the efforts of the brave people behind me, we have vanquished the creature that terrorized our citizens," she said, gesturing to the 5 remaining survivors. I wondered what happened to the one that ran. I also noticed she didn't mention me. Typical politician, I thought, not bothering to correct the woman. Someone from the crowd yelled, "Who brought this evil upon our town?" Murmurs of agreement filtered through the room. "We're not sure yet. An investigation has been launched to find the perpetrators of this crime. They will be punished accordingly when they are discovered." Another round of murmurs filled the room as people eyed each other suspiciously. A few gazes floated my way, but a quick glare turned them away. Sally answered a few more questions until the crowd filtered out to head home. They were all left with a warning to watch for more husks. I stepped up to Sally. "Congratulations on freeing the town from the evil," I said dryly. "Yes, well, the people need to know their leader is strong. Not that they needed outside help." "What do you want, Paul?" "Oh, I'm just here to claim my reward. I want the building with the tattoo studio in it." "That's too much, can't you pick a smaller house?" "No, I already chose that building. This was just a courtesy to let you know." "And what if that isn't acceptable?" I snorted. "You're more than welcome to try and kick me out," I said with a smile. She glared at me before responding, "Fine, have it. I think the family that lived there was on vacation when the system hit anyway." "How generous of you," I said, my words laced with sarcasm. I didn't wait for her response as I left the hotel and headed to my new home. Chapter 66, Moving In. It took the people of Armin a few days before a sense of normality returned. As normal as life could be after the world ended. Martin came by my shop on the second day. He came to tell me they figured out what happened. When they were doing a census, they came across a woman named Gran's house. That wasn't her real name, but everyone just called her Gran, short for Grandma. Her husk had to be dispatched as it was roaming the house. That was when they discovered the magic circle. It was an open secret that the woman dabbled in the dark arts, long before the system came into being, and she had chosen a class called Spirit Binder. They weren't sure what she had been trying to bind, but they figured she accidentally called up the banshee instead. As for where the banshee came from, local legends spoke of a woman that had been wronged by her husband. The woman murdered her entire family and burned herself alive in the plantation house as a result. They say her soul was cursed to never be in peace after her foul deeds. I didn't know if that was actually the case, but it didn't matter. The woman was dead, the person that unleashed it was dead, and I was still alive. I thanked Martin for letting me know the details. The man left with a friendly wave, although, his smile was no longer as warm as it had been before. The man lost 2 of his best friends in the attack and the city was still counting the dead. It was surprising to me that quite a few survived in storm shelters. For whatever reason, the banshee was unable to detect them inside the spaces. I asked Fiona to check it out, maybe she could determine why. As for Bella, I spent the rest of the first day trying to find her in the swamp. Other than a few tracks, I wasn't able to locate her. I hoped she was alright and that she would return in time. My second day was spent enhancing the second copy of my staff to match the first. I did this while Fiona was out looking at the storm shelters. Martin was helping her. The two had hit it off, which surprised me. The rest of the town looked at Fiona with distrust, but she could take care of herself. I forced the citizens to give up the weapons I made until I was certain they wouldn't be used against Fiona. They were reluctant until I told them to bring me a better weapon from the bazaar and I would make it better. A few people came to me with makeshift armor they wanted rune crafted. I agreed, so long as they took the oath and paid me for my time. I didn't give them anything as fanciful as my mage bane armor, but my skills had improved. So much so that their armor was now better than the original set I had made while under the thumb of Sharla. I could have made them even better equipment if the quality of materials supported the magic. For anyone interested, I posted a listing of materials needed to construct a brigandine like mine. A few people wrote down the items before they left. Any metal would do. I didn't expect the simple folk around here to have the credits for full mithril as I had used. A few asked me if I could construct a full set of plate armor for them. I had to explain to them that I wasn't a blacksmith or armorer, I could only rivet plates into place and carve my magic into them. I told them I could modify a set if they purchased one. Those people left disappointed. That was fine, the money wasn't anything to write home about. I only managed to make 100 credits so far for my work. I wasn't here for the money though. Not that I got to keep most of that anyway. Constable Sally, being the only leader of the town and being uncontested, was given rights by the system to tax people or businesses within. She was still upset with me over my initial refusal to help, so she taxed my shop and anything purchased from it by 30%. Admittedly, this was an oversight on my part. I hadn't been in a town controlled by one individual yet and didn't realize this was a system perk. That was fine. She wouldn't be getting any of my upgraded items until she stopped acting like a petty child. I knew the townsfolk respected the woman, mostly for what she had done for them after the system went active. But if she continued to treat all outsiders this way, the town would eventually collapse and die. Personally, I thought her brother would make a better constable, but I doubt he wanted that position. And I was not getting involved in the politics of this town. I only wanted to spend a few months here, work on learning to tattoo, maybe find a few dungeons to clear, and then it was on to other things. I also hoped that Frotzar got the message I sent him. I had no idea if those communication plates I purchased were legitimate or not. Time would tell. My hand slipped as I was tattooing the chilled slab of pork skin. I cursed at my fuck up. Pig skin was the closest analog to human skin I could get without tattooing myself. Turns out it was a lot more difficult than I thought. Some of that might be due to the fact I had to do it all manually, as there was no electricity for the tattooing machines. It was a good thing the proprietor had an old Japanese-style tattooing set. The manual approach was much more difficult to learn, but it gave me finer control over the end product. Martin had offered to loan me the Mana engine he purchased, but I turned him down. I could just purchase my own if I needed one. I might pick one up on my next visit. I shook the cramp out of my hand and started over on another section of the skin. The ice below would keep the skin cool for another hour or so before I had to store it back in my ring until I could produce more ice. This wasn't all that difficult for me with my imbue, but it wasn't exactly easy to lug the ice around. Despite my setback, I was improving. My first attempts looked like blobs of ink, where all the lines had run together. For what I had in mind, I needed an extremely steady hand. The week went by quickly. Most of my time spent crafting for others or practicing tattooing. Bella finally returned on the 6th day and I was overjoyed to see her. She was covered in muck from the swamp and sported a few wounds I had to heal, but she had survived. I cleaned her up and put her back in her storage for some much-needed rest. I looked up as the bell above the door dinged. Martin walked in with a smile and wave, Fiona following behind. "Hey, Paul, how's it going?" "Oh, I'm doing well. What brings you by?" "We figured out the conundrum with the shelters." My interest perked up at this. "Oh yet?" I asked, looking at Fiona. She nodded, yet, turns out not all of the shelters were safe. All the ones that were, I couldn't step foot near. Yep, turns out the builder of those always consecrated the ground with holy water. He was a very superstitious man from what I remember, he died a few years before the system. Well, I guess you learn something new every day. Good to know consecrated ground can keep out spirits. I wonder why it didn't work in the graves though. I had a theory on that, Martin added. I figure it has to do with how long ago it was done or the fact that corpses break the protection. It would explain the fact that the church wasn't spared the banshee's wrath. We found signs that husks had been clawing at the doors. I just nodded, it made sense to me, not that I was going to dig too much into spirits and whatnot. Not unless it was to find a way to destroy them. Thanks for the information, I replied sincerely. Martin was one of the most honest and generally likable people I had met, even before the world ended. It's too bad his sister acted like a dictator. Nah, man, it's the least I could do for your help with the banshee. Plus I got to chat with the charming Fiona. Anyway, I gotta go out on patrol, I'll see you later. You going to be okay out there? I asked. Oh yeah, we got a few more people that decided to join after the incident. You might know one, Gail, she was the woman that killed the banshee. With her husband's death, she took it upon herself to help protect the town. I nodded, not really sure what to say. Martin gave one last wave as he left the building. You should help them out, Fiona said flatly. We've been over this, I replied, turning back to my work. Helping them would only hinder the town's growth. When we leave they may not be able to handle the challenges that come their way. Fiona huffed in annoyance and floated away. She had been trying to get me to help for the last few days. I understood her reasoning, the town had lost some good fighters but I wasn't going to budge on this. I was heading out in another day or two anyway. It was time to look for a dungeon. When I asked Martin about it he said they hadn't spotted anything like that in the vicinity. Since I knew they had kept to the roads that wasn't much of a surprise. With Bella and Fiona, we should be able to locate one within a few days. I did have to purchase a tent and a new sleeping bag though. Luckily Martin pointed me in the direction of a man that owned a small survival store. He wouldn't take credit so I had to trade him a rune-crafted machete for the items I desired. He was more than happy to take the oath. All this extra work with rune crafting was really pushing my skills to the next level. I think I had done more in the last 5 days than I had in the last 6 months. Most of my improvement came in the control of how deep I carved. This allowed me to have more consistent results across all of my runes, allowing fewer runes to have the same result as more. At the moment it was only 1 rune worth of difference but it was a start. This also meant I could pack more power into items, the only limitation being the item's quality and components. During this time I also took a look at the 6 enhanced slave collars I had. I had the basic slave collars as well, 9 of those in total. I spent most of the first night closely inspecting the collars. I had never really had the time to just sit and look at them. I could see the faint lines of the enchantment running through the devices. Comparing the old to the new collars it was clear that the enchantment was much stronger. It's a good thing I decided not to test the enchantment. I'm not sure my runes could have overwhelmed the magic on the newer collar. I did come up with a plan for the new collars though. Since the design as a whole was too powerful I created 6 loops of runes around the collar. They were designed to break the material along the lines. This of course would trigger the failsafe in the device, causing it to explode inward. That wouldn't do for what I wanted, so I added more runes that would reflect the damage outward and enhance it. In essence, I turned these new collars into cluster claymores. None of this would activate unless I said the trigger word. I also figured out a way to link runes to a single person. All it took was a little blood. Now nobody but me could activate the effects. I repeated this process with the other 2 advanced collars and turned the other 9 simple collars into grenades, only now they were slightly more powerful. I only wish I had more time to test my tattoos out. But I wasn't confident in my skills yet so that would have to wait. I made sure my gear was all ready, put my armor back on, and locked up my building. It was still weird thinking of it as mine. I let Bella out from her cage, she looked rested and healthy. I nodded to Fiona and the 3 of us headed out of town to look for some dungeons. Chapter 67, Back on the Hunt. It took over a day of crisscrossing the muddy terrain to locate our first dungeon. I don't know what was worse, the swamp creatures that we had to fight off or the damn bugs. Nothing we came across was over level 10, making them easy to dispatch. The worst was the swamp creeper. Not because it was hard to fight but because it took over an hour to fight to its actual body, the mass of vine-like appendages keeping it safe. Fire would have been my preferred method to dispatch the plant-based creature but the area was so wet it wouldn't burn. That left hacking it to pieces. At one point Fiona tried to just go in and stab it but she learned her skill had limitations. She couldn't turn physical while anything bisected her form. Since the creature was a mass of writhing plant matter, it made it impossible for her to get anywhere near the body. My staff also wasn't ideal in this situation. Sure, I had the sharp spikes on each end but they could only tear into the plants and not really cut them off. I ended up resorting to using Fiona's sword. She had a good laugh at how inept I was with the blade. But we finally fought our way to the creature and killed it. The killing part was easy since it was immobile. One stab through its chest was enough to kill it, being only level 5 in all. I made sure to keep track of the types of monsters I found and how to kill them. I'm sure Martin would find the information useful. Fiona and I stared at the deteriorating building. I think it used to be an old church but it was hard to tell. Are you sure it's a dungeon? She asked. No, but it doesn't feel like a normal abandoned building. Well, only one way to find out. We approached the building cautiously. As soon as we crossed the threshold of the door I got a message. You have entered the Slime Church, level 3 dungeon. Recommended team size, 3 people of level 4 or higher, good luck. Well, that's a bit underwhelming, I said, inspecting the inside of the first room. There was definitely some TARDIS-like fuckery going on, the inside was way bigger than the building we found. Slime coated most of the room. As we watched some of it started to ball up and plop to the floor. I haven't fought a slime in ages, Fiona said. Any pointers? Don't let them cover your head, and aim for the dark bit, that's their core. While we were talking 5 of the slimes had formed on the ground and were moving toward me. I hit one with an earth fist to see what would happen. The spell stretched the blob but failed to penetrate the body, the thing reformed as it slid off the protruding bit of earth. Well, that was disappointing. I tried a concentrated stunning gust next. The spell penetrated the blob of goo with ease, blasting it apart. I was inspecting my handiwork and didn't notice the one getting closer. I turned my head when I noticed it wobble. The slime shot its body at me like a projectile. I reacted instinctively, moving my staff to block the appendage. It slammed into my staff, and flowed past without slowing. The attack slammed into my armor, causing my shield to flare and me to stumble backward in surprise. Shit, those things pack a punch, I said. I looked at the damage and it only did 25 to my shield but the impact felt like someone slammed a dead blow hammer into my chest. Fiona chuckled at me, she must have known what to expect. I shook my head and refilled my shield with mana. Let's see how they like fire. The dungeon was easy once you learned how to deal with the slime. I didn't have much to worry about even when they did attack me, I just had to avoid getting overwhelmed by the creatures. Fire was effective for dealing with them, as well as simply stabbing them with something sharp enough to penetrate their membranes. The slime was immune to sonic attacks like Banshee's wail and attacks like Seismic Strike. Their immunity didn't surprise me, I just wanted to test every ability I had, to see what worked and what didn't. Since the dungeon was a low level I felt safe doing this. We entered the final room, which held a massive slime. I used Inspect on it. Slime King level 6. I used Blink Step and Flurry to quickly put the boss down. Congratulations, you are the first team to clear this dungeon. For this feat, you have been awarded 1 free skill slot. For clearing this dungeon you have been awarded 200 credits, for being the first team to clear this dungeon you have been awarded 100 additional credits. You have earned the title Muckraker 10% additional damage when fighting slime-based creatures. Another free skill slot, some credits, and a new title. It was good to see some growth again. I decided to hold on to the skill slot, for now, seeing no point in selecting the available skills for my class. The loot was useless and I chose to leave it behind. Martin would be happy to know this was an easy dungeon to clear. It would help the weaker members of Armin to grow. After we left the dungeon, Fiona flew up to help locate where the dungeon was, in location to a nearby landmark. She came back a few minutes later. Turned out the dungeon was less than a mile from a road. I added that note and the general location to my notebook. I got Bella out and we went in search of more dungeons. We weren't able to find the next one until a day later. It was made from a massive rotten tree. We entered to see what level of dungeon we're dealing with. You have entered the Grove, level 12 dungeon. Recommended team size, 4 people of level 14 or higher, good luck. This could prove to be quite a challenging dungeon, I remarked. The inside was filled with all types of plants. Large bugs could be seen flittering among the assorted flora. I think I'll just burn it all. Just be careful, I'll keep an eye out for anything trying to attack. I nodded to Fiona and started spinning my staff, imbued with fire. Eye of the storm filled the large room, turning it into an inferno. This turned out to be a mistake as black smoke started to fill the air. I started coughing and had to end my spell and rush back outside. I had to cleanse the poison produced from the burning plant matter as well as heal the damage the smoke had done. Fiona came out a few minutes later. You stirred up a hornet's nest in there, everything is going crazy. I could hear shrieking coming from the dungeon, black smoke still poured out from the entrance. I watched kill notifications pour in as the smoke and fire killed off the monsters inside. It took 20 minutes for the smoke to clear before I could re-enter. The first room was just filled with glowing black coals. If the monsters had dropped any loot it was destroyed by the fire. The next 2 rooms were much of the same. It wasn't until I entered the 4th room that the environment changed. Something had managed to put out the fire or halt it as the room was mostly intact. I didn't have to wait long to find out what had done it. A wood elemental burst out from the foliage and attacked me with its vine-like arms. I was forced to bat them away by spinning my staff. The fire from my staff burned into the creature causing it to shriek in rage. This was a similar creature to the one that Nature Mage had in Chicago. The only difference was I wouldn't be able to kill its source of mana to banish it. I did a quick identify to see what I was dealing with. Lesser Wood Elemental level 14. It whipped more vines at me, this time covered in thorns. While it was focused on me, Fiona attacked it from the back. I whipped my staff out and cast Calcify as it connected with the tentacle. The spell spread quickly along the thin appendage, causing it to fall to the ground and shatter. My shield had taken a few glancing blows from the creature and was down to 100 points left. The elemental didn't do a significant amount of damage but it was constantly attacking. It mostly ignored Fiona's attacks. I watched the damaged and destroyed limbs of the elemental regenerate, and swore. I was going to have to pull out all the stops to deal enough damage to overpower this creature's ability to heal. It took the combined effort of Fiona and me another hour before we were finally able to overwhelm the creature's ability to regenerate. The husk that once was a wood elemental collapsed to the ground, shattering like a bundle of sticks. Bella would have been helpful but the area was too tight for her bulky frame to maneuver and give us open lines to attack the creature. I heaved out a tired breath as I slipped to the ground in exhaustion. In the end, I had to multicast Calcifying Strike 3 times in a row and use multiple casts of Flurry to sever the creature's connection to the earth around it. We had tried something similar earlier in the fight but as soon as the creature was able to connect with the surrounding dirt it quickly recovered again. My shield had long since failed and I was covered in dozens of small cuts from the elemental's vines. With my mana tapped, I needed to wait for it to refill before I could heal since I didn't want to waste a mana potion. At least my armor held up, I thought darkly. If I had been able to utilize fire more extensively we probably could have killed off the creature sooner. But with the enclosed underground space the toxic fumes quickly filled the area. My class wasn't well suited to fighting nature-based creatures. A class with damage over time abilities would probably be a better fit or something that could cause it to rot. In the end, we were able to defeat it but it wasn't even the boss of the dungeon. As Fiona floated up to me I made a decision. I think, we are done in this dungeon for now. If the boss is something stronger than this elemental I don't think we can take it alone. Fiona nodded in agreement. I did loot the lesser wood elemental though, getting some interesting wood from it. Elemental wood X4. I tested the wood, finding it strong and springy. It wasn't thick enough to use for a staff but it could be used for a bow. I tucked it away in my ring for my next visit to the bazaar. While bows weren't useful for me I knew at least a dozen people in Armen that had skills to use them. Do you want me to map the rest of the dungeon? I thought about her question for a bit, before responding. Alright, if you think it's safe, sure. It would be good to know what type of boss we might encounter if we return. Fiona floated deeper into the dungeon while I made my way to the exit. So far this place had been a bust, other than the wood. Fiona returned a half-hour later. Yeah, it was a good idea to leave. The boss room contained a nature guardian. Fiona continued after she got a blank look from me. Think of them like a pixie, only evil, and able to control anything nature-related, including elementals. Alone it wouldn't be hard to take down but there were 2 lesser wood elementals in the room with it, along with all kinds of plants. I scratched the beard that had begun to grow since Chicago. Any idea of its level? Level 16, the two elementals were level 12. Yet, one was hard enough. I'll mark it in my notes for Martin, then we can head out. This dungeon was probably safe from random discovery. Fiona wasn't able to see any roads or buildings from above the treeline. I had a general idea of how far we had traveled and estimated we were 20 or 30 miles from Armen. Our direction of travel had been steadily east, towards Biloxi. Since it was my plan to stop there anyway, locating dungeons was a bonus of sorts. I stored the journal and let Bella out to stretch for a bit before we got back to our search. The third dungeon was an odd one. We came across this small abandoned community, easily spotted from quite a distance away. As soon as we rode past the town sign, I got a dungeon message. You have entered Suburbia, level 9 dungeon. Recommended team size, 6 people of level 8 or higher, good luck. I didn't have time to think about the name before spears started flying in our direction. Bella reacted faster than I did and jumped to the side, hissing. The maneuver almost threw me from the saddle, a reminder that I wasn't a true mounted expert. 4 bipedal wolfmen came running at us, brandishing more spears. I used Identify as I tripped one with Earth Fist. Kobold Spearman level 8. What I had originally mistaken for fur features turned out to be scale. They did have a mix of fur and scales. The fur was mostly on their head, like a human, along with some on their upper chest as well as their shoulders. I flipped backward out of the saddle as a spear sailed toward me. Bella simply ducked under it with an angry hiss. The kobolds barked angrily in return. I was surprised the system didn't translate. My roll brought me to my feet behind Bella as she launched herself at the pack. There was frightened yipping as they scattered at her charge. The one I tripped wasn't quick enough to get away as Bella grabbed it by the neck and gave a sharp yank. I could hear the bones snapping from my position. One turned towards me, howling in rage. The others picked up the howl. After they stopped, I heard other howls from farther off. Shit! I dodged another thrown spear and ran towards the offender. My staff appeared in my hand as I imbued it with electrical damage. The kobolds were about 5 feet tall and were muscled like a sprinter. Something slammed into my armor's shield, shaving off 50 points. I spared a glance to the side and saw one of the kobolds engaged with Bella had used my distraction to chuck a spear at me. The creature had a surprised look when its spear didn't impale me, but it quickly went back to trying to kill Bella. Fiona returned the favor, stabbing it through the back. I fought with my target while the distant yips kept getting closer. The creature was a competent fighter, managing to block my blows with his last spear. I used my range advantage to stab out at the creature. It misjudged the weight of my weapon and it cut a gash along its shoulder. It shook off the electrical damage and hissed, a red glow suffusing its body. The speed of its strikes increased, surprising me a little. Enough so that I took 2 strikes to my shield before I retaliated with flurry. I pulled my bloody staff from the corpse as a dozen more projectiles came flying in. Spears were mixed with rocks from slings. 3 more impacts jarred my shield, taking it down another 100 points. It only had a few points left, so I decided to cast Area of Denial and Blink Step, running at the group of kobolds. I wasn't expecting to run into a green barrier. The magical shield rippled violently at my impact, shattering. It was enough to stop me dead in my tracks though. I looked for the caster that conjured the barrier, finding him in the back. Fiona, deal with the mage, I'll deal with the rest. I didn't wait for a response as I started to cut my way through the creatures. The kobolds' anger only grew as they tried to shatter my defense. I couldn't activate Eye of the Storm because they weren't giving me enough time to spin my staff. Every time I tried, they would interrupt it from beyond my barrier. That was fine, I had more than enough ways to deal with these creatures. While my Area of Denial was active, I fed mana into my armor to replenish its shield a bit. I was able to take down 4 of the kobolds while Aode was active. Fiona had dealt with the mage and Bella would run in and grab one of the creatures by the tail and drag them off to be ripped apart by her talons. As the kobolds grew more desperate, they activated their ability to enhance their speed, attacking indiscriminately. Terrified screeches filled the air as they found they couldn't fight against Fiona. Even the occasional attack that she wasn't able to block failed to land as she changed from her solid form back to her ghostly one. Bella finished off the last kobold, tearing it apart and swallowing the bloody chunks. I looked away, making sure to scan the area for any more hostiles. The town was quite large. Well, large for a dungeon. I tried a few doors, none of them would open. When I inspected them closer, I realized they were all fake. Stupid real fake doors, I mumbled. All of the buildings were fake, yet from even a few feet away they looked convincing. I tried to break out the windows. Whatever they were made from was tough stuff. I was not able to even scratch the material. I convinced Fiona to try and enter one of the buildings. She came back out a minute or so later. They are completely solid on the inside. I shook my head at the weirdness of this dungeon. Fiona went ahead to scout while Bella and I made our way slowly through the fake city. Fiona would report back when she found groups of kobolds and we would go and fight them. If you caught them off guard they were easy to take out. It was only when they managed to call in reinforcements that we had trouble. Eventually, Fiona found the kobold camp. It was nestled between taller buildings. Tents littered the area around a large central fire. A larger kobold sat on a throne made from sticks, 3 skinnier kobolds surrounded him. I assumed they were female variants. They watched us approach, the king standing tall as we entered. He let out a loud bark, that echoed among the walls, before stepping down from his platform. The 3 female kobolds started casting spells, their target wasn't us though. I watched as the kobold king grew 2 feet, his muscles bulging and his toothy maw turning even more savage. He pulled out a large sword from behind the throne, that I had mistaken for a pole. It looked like the comically large swords in anime. I wasn't laughing though as I saw him swing the massive hunk of metal with ease. We stared at each other from opposite sides of the fire. He let out one last howl before crouching and leaping over the fire in a burst of speed. I noticed the 3 women weren't just sitting idle either, they had pulled out weapons and were rushing around the fire to assist. I would have to let Fiona and Bella deal with those 3, as I dealt with the king. I activated Aura of Rage and all 3 healing spells as the king landed, his sword smashing the ground where I had stood a few seconds before. I felt the power from the 3 kobold women flow into me but the king was able to resist my aura. His feet left small craters in the ground as he sprinted towards me. His sword swung in a low arc, aimed at my legs. I wasn't about to try and deflect that hunk of steel, instead, leaping back from his attack. I added ice to my staff and activated Flurry. The creature activated an ability, his sword moved at an impossible speed to parry each of my strikes. All I could see was a shower of sparks as our weapons connected. I jumped out of his reach as soon as my skill was completed. The kobold lazily moved his sword up to a batter's stance and I could see the dents my weapon had made in the weapon. The king smiled toothily as he eyed me. I took the pause to identify him. Krager Kobold Champion Level 12. I kept my distance as we eyed each other, my staff was in a position to strike out or deflect as needed. I saw him twitch and cast Stunning Gust as I punched my staff forward. I found that the pointed end of my staff helped to concentrate the spell even more. A tight knot of wind sped toward Krager as he slipped to the side and burst toward me at inhuman speed. I was forced to use Blink Step just to dodge the massive overhand slash. The ground where I stood was caved in from the strike but I was sent spinning. Krager had used one of his taloned hands to punch me as his sword was descending. I missed seeing his strike as I was fixated on his sword. I tumbled until I slammed into one of the buildings. The blow had cost my shield over 200 points. The angry lizard dog freight train of destruction wasn't done yet though. He rushed toward my new location, jaws wide and arms outstretched. I only had a second to activate Banshee's wail as he ran at me. Krager stumbled but his forward momentum couldn't be stopped, forcing me to roll out of his path before I was trampled. He slammed into the building, cracking the rock-like facade. I didn't waste the opportunity, slamming my staff down on the back of one of his legs while activating Calcifying Strike. I was forced to scramble away as a clawed hand ripped through the air I was occupying. I heard the shriek of metal as his claws brushed my armor. That meant my shield was now down. I took a step back and suddenly felt a tiny bit weaker. Shit, that meant one of the females was dead, leaving me at a disadvantage. Krager turned toward me, I could see my spell was affecting him as he limped noticeably on his damaged limb. He smiled at me, then disappeared. I turned in time to see him pulling his sword from the ground and whipping it at my head. I ducked the thrown mass of steel and when I looked up he was gone again. Acting on instinct, I threw myself flat. I felt the air whoosh by overhead. Krager had turned into a spinning top of death. I was forced to roll away from him as he angled his attack lower. This boss's abilities were just beyond ridiculous. Once out of his reach I used Seismic Strike to disrupt his footing. He stumbled as he lost balance, letting go of his sword. The hunk of metal slammed into my side as I managed to avoid a direct blow. I hissed in pain as I felt a rib break. It forced me to finally cancel Aura of Rage so I could heal. Krager didn't bother to stand back up, instead, he sprinted at me on all fours. He was even faster in that position than he was on too. I was forced to blast the area with shroud and pick a random direction to dive. Angry yips and howls could be heard as he slashed at the mist to try and find me. I activated my talisman so I could see through the magic and took stock of the battle. Fiona and Bella had managed to take down 2 of the females. I must have just missed them killing the second. I saw that Bella had numerous wounds on her and threw a healing touch her way. This turned out to be a mistake. Krager saw the light and rocketed in that direction. I was only able to stop him by activating Earth Fist on his calcifying calf muscle. He went down in a heap as his leg gave out from under him. My mana was running near empty at this point, so I used one of my mana injectors as I sprinted after the champion. I leaped into the air and brought my staff down on Krager's back with all of my strength. Ice and electricity coursed through his body, finally stunning him long enough for me to continue my assault. The fight ended less than a minute later as I landed the last blow on Krager. Fiona had been able to dispatch the last female kobold with ease after my obscuring mist filled the area. Turns out she wasn't affected by the obscuring effects of the mist. I had to sit and wait another 9 minutes for the spell to end so I could see. I didn't want to waste any more charges on my amulet unless I had to. It needed to last until I could replace it with a tattoo. I went around and looted the corpses and the treasure chest hidden behind the throne. Krager's Clever Cleaver. Dusk Blade. Moon Blade. Sun Blade. 400 credits. Ring of the Champion. There were some interesting items. I used Identify on each to see what the descriptions were. Krager's Clever Cleaver, only a fool is separated from his weapon. Allows you to teleport to the weapon's location, with the handle in your dominant hand. Cost 5 HP per 10 feet of teleportation. No wonder he was bouncing around like Yoda on crack. Too bad the weapon wasn't a normal size. Someone in Armen may want to purchase it, but I couldn't think of anyone with the strength to wield such a large weapon. Joshua might have been able to in his animal forms if he was still alive. The Dusk, Moon, and Sun blades were just the same short sword with increased damage based on the time of day. I could sell those to the citizens of Armen. Last was the Ring of the Champion. Ring of the Champion, this ring signifies that you are the undisputed champion. Wearing this ring gives you an intimidating presence. You appear far larger than you are, anyone attacking you suffers a -1 to endurance. The ring wasn't all that useful for me. My endurance was quite high already and most people or monsters were subject to my aura. 1 point, either way, wasn't likely to help me much. I put the item in my storage ring to sell at the bazaar, along with the cleaver. I quickly checked the rewards for clearing the dungeon before we headed out. For clearing this dungeon you have been awarded 800 credits. I stopped and stared at the single notification. Well, that sucks. Someone or a party had already cleared the dungeon and taken the first clear bonus. I guess it wasn't too surprising, this dungeon wasn't exactly hidden. I finished healing Bella before the 3 of us rode out of the dungeon and towards Biloxi. Chapter 68, Turning Heads. I rode into Biloxi on Bella. We were greeted on the main road like we were before. This time it was a different group that greeted me. None of the men hassled me like the previous time. The city was quite busy, considering its location and the bazaar. I wasn't surprised. I kept an eye out for trouble as Bella made her way down the streets and towards the bazaar. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary, but the crowd still made me nervous. Before my imprisonment, I wouldn't have thought twice about being around this many people. Now, I measured everyone as a possible threat to me. Humans more so than the other races. It wasn't a healthy way to live, I knew that, but it would take time for me to change. I let out a sigh of relief as I entered the bazaar. I couldn't wait to get back to Armen or hunting dungeons. Anything to be away from the mass of humanity. My last time in Biloxi was less stressful because I had people I at least worked with, along with me. Fiona was with me, but she needed to remain invisible and incorporeal to heal the damage she suffered in the last dungeon. I would deal with my phobia. I wasn't planning to spend a lot of time in the bazaar. As soon as I located a weapon seller, I negotiated a price for the cleaver. I ended up getting 1,100 credits for it. The merchant refused to budge on the price even though I could tell it was worth quite a bit more. I took the offer and moved on to sell the ring. I ended up getting 500 for the ring. It took a bit of wandering before I found a merchant selling mana engines. I also learned what powered them. I don't know why it never occurred to me that they were powered by mana hearts. You could power it from any fed mana, as well, but it wasn't as efficient. I couldn't take the gem out of my armor to use that, so I ended up having to purchase a few mana hearts. The mana engine itself was cheaper than I thought, at only 400 credits. The 2 tiny mana gems cost me more than the engine at 500 credits. The merchant assured me that a fully charged gem would last 2 hours. This explained why the devices were so weak. I couldn't imagine the 50 mana that I could pour into the gems was enough to power much of anything. The magical interface on the device was smart enough to supply only the power needed for something to work, at least until it hit its maximum output. It made me wonder how many mana engines they needed to power that stupid tower in Chicago. I also purchased an item called a hidden enclosure. It was a circular tent with an invisibility enchantment placed on it. Once the door was closed, the enchantment activated. The tent only cost me 250, it was cheap because it had no other defensive enchantments on it. This meant it wasn't any stronger than a normal tent. I was fine with that, only wanting it for its invisibility. My next stop was a shop that sold enchanting supplies. I figured I might need ink capable of holding mana to power my tattoo idea. The other option was using ink made from my blood, but I figured that was a bit tacky. 50 credits later and I was on my way. The merchant did ask me a few questions about what I wanted the ink for. He wanted to know what guild I was a part of and who my mentor was. I managed to deflect his questions and get out before the man caused a scene. I didn't need to get on the bad side of some unknown guild monopoly on enchanting. I had one final stop to make before I left. It took me 4 stops before I found a skill dealer, at least one that had a skill I was interested in. I thought about what I could use in my repertoire for a while. This skill came to mind from my time in Chicago. My human meteorite combo was highly effective. The only problem was not every place had high buildings I could leap from. I also wanted a bit more control over my descent. I also needed the skill to work with my dexterity stat. The skill I located was a 15-second ability called Wings of the Falcon. It was enough time to gain altitude and come into a controlled dive. If I used Blink Step's agility boost, I could slam into the ground much faster, causing much more damage. The spell would also give me an ability to fight flying creatures, or escape in a direction that enemies might not expect. The cost of the ability was significant at 2,500 credits, that was after haggling with the merchant for 10 minutes. I paid the beastkin and activated the skill plate, feeling the knowledge of the ability form in my mind. I would wait until I left Biloxi to test it, no point showing possible enemies what I can bring to a fight. Now that I had everything I needed, I headed back to the portal. I was just about to exit when I heard someone call out. I turned to see who it was. "Excuse me, sir," a reedy-looking half-elf said. "Can I help you?" I asked, scanning for possible trouble. "Are you from the new world that recently joined?" "If you are, could I hire you?" the man asked in a nervous tone. I scanned the individual, expecting some sort of trap. Valerius researcher level 11. The man wasn't armed, but he could be storing items or weapons in a ring, like me. I decided to hear the man out. If I didn't like what he was selling, I would just walk away. "Hire me, for what?" "Oh, right, sorry, my apologies. I tend to get a bit frazzled and scatterbrained at times." "Yes, anyway, where was I?" "Oh, yes. My name is Valerius. I study worlds, well, ecosystems, and the changes that the system had on them. As you could imagine, this is rather difficult, what with no new worlds joining in over 1,000 years. The man rattled on until I stopped him. "Stop, please, just tell me why you want to hire me." "Oh right, again, apologies. I need a guide to your world." "Well, not to your world, I already transferred over to your cosmic coordinates. I need a guide to show me around and protect me while I study. I will pay quite handsomely for your time and effort," the man finally added. I chewed on his words for a bit. The man waited with pent-up excitement for me to answer. "I won't always be out in the wilds, sometimes I will remain at my home for weeks on end." "Not a problem, in fact, that will help me even more, if you could provide a place for me to go over my notes and rest." Do you have a mount?" "I do, standard horse, is that sufficient?" "Yeah, that will be fine." "I want 500 credits a day," the man's face paled at the cost before I continued. "This will include food, shelter, and protection. If I have to save you from your own stupidity, that is going to be extra. If you try and harm me or others I care for, I will cut you down. Do we have an agreement?" I figured if the man was serious about finding a guide that he would accept my offer, if not, oh well. "Do you need payment up front?" the man asked, mulling over my offer. "Each day's payment up front. If you miss a day I will tack on additional fees that need to be paid before I will continue my services. Agreed. I agree, the man said, holding out his hand to shake. I shook the man's hand with a bit of hesitation. He seemed almost too eager to agree. He handed me the credits and we exited the bazaar. Reginald cursed, that damn half-elf had managed to give them the slip. They knew where he was going, but if he got too far ahead the tracker wouldn't be able to locate him. His boss had sent the 4 of them to this new world to scout resources and possible locations to plunder or control. Rumors of the new world spread quickly through the system. Stories of meteoric rises in levels as well as beasts and dungeons everywhere. His boss wanted a stake in that new world and had invested 40,000 credits to send 3 of his strongest people over to establish a base. While a researcher wasn't the best asset to use for something like this, it was what they had to work with. They had captured the man a few years ago and kept him around to identify rare objects that they came across. If his boss found out the man escaped, they wouldn't find any sympathy. Do you have his trail? Reginald demanded. Oslo rolled his eyes. Of course, he is only an hour or so ahead of us. Reginald looked at the strange buildings of glass and stone that made up the town in this world. He was human, as were his allies. It made it easy to blend in with the locals. Although, he did see a few other races already trying to establish their presence here in this new world. They would have to work quickly if they wanted to secure a section for themselves. The 3 pulled out horses from storage and rode off, following the trail. Reginald looked towards Zul. He had been quiet the entire time. It wasn't out of place for the large man, but Reginald had given him a tongue lashing after he failed to keep an eye on the half-elf. Zul had the intelligence of a child. He made up for that lack of intelligence with brute force that few could contend with, being half-orc and all. The man followed orders, but he got distracted at times. I ignored Belarius's non-stop chatter as I scanned the forest while we rode. The man acted like he hadn't been in a proper conversation in years. He reminded me of a guy I knew that was homeschooled. That man had no sense of social interaction. I sighed. Belarius, you need to calm down and be quiet. This is not a safe area we are traversing. In fact, there aren't really any safe areas besides towns and villages. First, we are heading to the place I'm staying, but with it getting late we are going to have to camp for the night, I stated coldly. Sorry, he replied, sheepishly. I wasn't too worried about being attacked. Fiona was scouting and I had Bella, who had better sense than I did. I just wanted the man to shut up. We rode in silence for another hour or so before I pulled off the main road and found an area I was comfortable camping in. The jut of rock rose above the surrounding swamp just enough to keep it dry and free of water. I placed the survival tent down. All right, you might as well rest inside while I scout the perimeter. Are you sure? The man asked, looking around nervously. It'll be fine. I'll be back in half an hour. The tent has an invisibility enchantment on it, so nobody will know you are here. The man nodded as he stored his horse and entered the tent, closing it up. I watched it vanish. Keep an eye on him, I whispered to Fiona. She faded into view only long enough to give me a wink before she vanished again. It was time to test out my new ability. I walked into the trees until the camp was lost from view. This should be far enough, I said, stopping to examine the skills stats. Wings of the Falcon, produces large wings capable of propelling a person into the air for 15 seconds. Cost 50 mana, cooldown 2 minutes. The cost was manageable even if I needed to multicast. Now it was time to test the skill out. I cast the spell and examined the result. Large black and grey wings sprouted from my upper back. They didn't seem bothered by the fact that they went straight through my armor. My armor was unaffected as well. I gave the wings a test flap, lifting a foot off the ground with one powerful stroke. The feeling of suddenly having 2 new appendages was odd. I flapped them a few more times, rising 15 feet into the air. One of my wings hit a branch as I was rising and I tilted over and slammed into the tree and then the ground. I groaned softly as I pulled myself off the muddy ground. The fall had cost me 25 health and 15 points on my shield. I really needed to make a helmet and leggings to go with my armor. That way the shield would cover me completely. I would have to redesign the runes or get 2 more mana hearts to do this though. I wiped the dirty mud off my face. I wasn't worried about the armor, it was self-cleaning. I waited 2 more minutes for the spell to reset to try again. This time I wanted to see just how far up one cast would take me. I cast the spell and rocketed into the air with powerful strokes of the wings. I watched the timer tick down as I continued to climb. I was easily as high as a 5-story building. The spell ended and I was still traveling upward from sheer momentum. I smiled as I hit the apex of my flight and started coming back down. It was hard to tell from my vantage point, but I think I managed another 10 feet or so of unpowered flight. I flipped over, facing the ground, and activated the spell again, using multicast. The wings spread from my back and I corkscrewed through the air as I dived at the ground. Before I got to the tree line, I flapped the wings to slow my descent. I misjudged my speed as I plummeted below the trees. My foot slammed into a branch and snapped. I choked off the scream as the pain shot into my mind, causing me to lose focus as I tumbled the rest of the way to the ground, trying to correct my flight. I landed with a loud crash, taking over 200 damage from my escapades. I hissed in pain as I tried to sit up. My healing was already activated and I could feel the bone in my foot pop back into place as the pain lessened. I laid back on the moss. This is why I wanted to practice first, I thought. Once the healing was complete, I stood up. The spell was everything I had wanted. Hell, with my blink step added, I could probably rise 200 feet into the air. I wanted to try it out tonight, but I chose to wait. If something attacked, I wanted to have area of denial available. If I tested out the wings right now, I would probably need to use AOD to make a safe landing without dying. I wasn't going to rely on second chance to save me. Who knows what would happen if I broke my neck in the fall. I walked back towards the camp as I brushed off any remaining dirt. Chapter 69, Hunter and the Prey. Reginald stopped as Oslo held up a hand. He watched as the man dismounted and inspected the ground around the road. He heard the man curse. "What is it?" he demanded. "We got a problem, seems our little friend isn't alone." "I wasn't sure until I saw their tracks both head off the road here," he said, gesturing to a barely visible trail. "That's not all, looks like whoever picked him up has a war mount." Reginald stiffened at that. While not rare, nobody bought a war mount unless they expected to be in almost constant fighting. There were many other options that people could buy that were both faster and cheaper. "Any idea what type?" he asked, "not that any of them would be good to fight." "Raver beast," he replied, spitting to the side. Shit, he had fought a few of the creatures in the past. Usually when attacking a well-armed caravan. The creatures were semi-intelligent and brutal. "Anyone else?" "No, tracks aren't deep enough for more than one rider. They will know we're coming long before we can sneak up on them," Reginald said. He had to think of the best course of action here. While it was likely they could take one rider, it might cost one of them their lives. So long as it wasn't his, he was willing to do that, but he didn't know the terrain or if this person had friends nearby. He might get his ass chewed out by the boss, but he chose the safer option. "Follow them at a safe distance, I will send a message back to the boss." Oslo nodded as he zipped into the swamp. The man could hide his presence and scent, but he couldn't keep them active for more than a few minutes. He composed a message to the boss, bending the truth a little. If his boss thought the man had been taken from him, he was more likely to send them some reinforcements. It would cost Reginald some clout in the organization, but he could redeem himself when he captured a bunch of resources and dungeons. It took Oslo 12 hours to return to the others. He had found the spot where the man with the war mount was camping, although he didn't see the half-elf. He waited silently in the trees, only close enough to keep the camp in view. It wasn't until the sun came up that he spotted the half-elf. He emerged from a tent that was cloaked in an invisibility enchantment. Tents like these weren't all that uncommon, but they were more expensive than a normal tent. He was too far away to make out any details about the man with the elf. A few times he thought he saw the man talking, but he never saw a sign of anyone else in the area. He watched them leave and followed the trail on foot until he was a few hours behind. Then he got his own horse out and followed. The trail ended at a small walled town. He scanned the sentries from his hiding place and made note of everything he saw before he raced back to the others. "So, you think he's still in the town?" Reginald asked. "Most likely, I didn't spot any other tracks other than theirs." "Well, we can't take a town with the three of us. The boss got back to me and is sending 4 more people through." "That's good," Oslo replied. "No, you idiot, one of the people he is sending is DeWalt." Oslo hissed in annoyance. DeWalt was the boss's right-hand man and executioner. If they fucked this up, the man was more than capable of taking them both out. The group headed back to the bazaar to meet up with the others. Fiona watched the 3 riders leave. It was possible she could have killed the scout, but she wanted to see what they were up to. She was also wary because she was still recovering from the dungeon. Her health didn't return quickly when she was injured, another day and she should be at full strength. She had first spotted the man following them when she did an aerial recon. The man was smart and kept his distance, shadowing them from beyond normal detection range. Since the man had not attacked them, she chose to follow him back. That was when she overheard their conversation. They were either after Paul or the half-elf. She was betting on the latter. She flew back to warn Paul and Martin. I rubbed my temples as Fiona told us about the group following me. Since she couldn't risk alerting them to her presence, she was unable to get their levels. What should we do? Martin asked. We will probably have to confront them at some point. First I need to talk to Belarius and see what he has to say. If he is in league with these people, I'll deal with it. Okay, but you can't take on 7 people by yourself, Martin replied. I gave a soft chuckle, perhaps. See if your sister wants to do something to assist. I'll ask, Martin replied skeptically. I understood his uncertainty. While his sister seemed like she would do anything to protect the town, it was unlikely she would jeopardize the safety and security of the town, for one outsider. A show of strength might drive them away, but these people seemed cautious. Nothing like the Black Dragon or other factions I had run into so far. Something about being given power had changed the way most people seemed to behave, that or they finally just dropped the thin veneer of civility. It meant it would be much more difficult to exploit their overconfidence. I hated fighting competent people, I groaned. The last competent person I fought had been Obadiah, and he killed me. I couldn't dwell on the issues, I needed to figure out a solution. First, I needed to talk with Belarius. I headed upstairs where the man was gleefully examining all of the dead earth tech he could. I told him he could take whatever he liked apart, but he got irate at that suggestion. Belarius, can we talk? Sure, have I mentioned how wonderful the tech on your world was? Simply fascinating. Focus, Belarius, I said, rubbing my temple. We discovered some people following us, do you know anything about that? Oh. Don't worry about them, I'm sure they won't bother you, he said smiling. He tried to walk out of the room, but I grabbed him by the arm. Then you won't have any issue if I kill them. I could feel the man's distress. You should just let me leave, these aren't the kind of people you want to involve yourself with. It's too late for that, they know where this city is and probably won't believe us if we tell them you left. No, you are going to wait here while I confront your friends. They are certainly not my friends, Belarius said with a huff. If you're not here when I get back, I will treat you as I treat them, I said, leaving the room. I couldn't leave Fiona here to watch the man, but if he ran I doubt he would get far. Martin would be more than happy to help me track the man down. Martin figured we had another 8 hours before the people arrived. I wish I would have had more time to work on my tattooing, but that simply wasn't the case. I sat on a log about a mile from the city. While there were multiple ways to get to Armen from Biloxi, I expected this group to come the same way from before. I was proven right when I spotted a group of horses coming down the dirt road. Well, you ready? I asked Fiona and Martin. His sister had adamantly denied any assistance. Martin and she had gotten into a heated argument over it, but she didn't budge. I was starting to think Martin was getting fed up with her recalcitrant attitude. I think stubbornness ran in their family, as I was unable to convince Martin to remain in the city. Yeah, don't worry about me, I can take care of myself, Martin replied. Trust in your friends, Fiona whispered into my ear. I cast my buffs on us as the riders got closer. They came to a stop about 100 feet away and got off their horses. I watched as 3 of the men approached. I kept my eyes on all of them though. I looked at Martin to see how he was doing. He was rolling some dice around in his hand with a relaxed look on his face. Can we help you, gentlemen? Martin asked. That's the one, a wiry-looking man nodded in my direction. So, this was the scout. I used Identify on the 3. Reginald Heliolite level 14. Oslo Pathfinder level 14. Zolbrute level 16. The other 4 were too far away to identify. I would have to trust Fiona to warn us if we should escape. You can return the property you stole from us, the man demanded. The Pathfinder and Brute didn't worry me too much, but I wasn't sure about the Heliolite. I knew the base word stood for sun or light. If he was a light-based mage, he could be dangerous. If by property you mean the half-elf, I assume. Yes, he is our property. Just the thought of ownership over someone else made my blood boil. Just because they didn't slap a collar on him didn't make it any better. Well, that's where we have a problem. You see, he paid me to keep him safe, I said, producing my staff, and I don't abide by people owning others. So, how about you get back on your horses and head back to your own world? The man looked at me with a smirk. That's a nice staff, I think I'll hang it up as a trophy when I pull it from your cold dead hands. Before they could react, I activated Shroud. I had discussed this possibility with Martin during our wait. He said it was fine, he had skills that didn't rely on him being able to see. I activated my talisman. I couldn't even recall how many uses I had left on the thing, so I would have to use it sparingly. I could see the big guy stumbling around, but the other two hadn't moved. I could see the helio light casting something. He started to glow as the mist started to evaporate in a small area around him. It didn't give me much time to work. I checked the other four who were also caught in the mist. They also hadn't moved. I activated Fire and Earth on my staff, then my wings and Blink Step. I picked this area because it was clear of trees. I burst through the mist and soared into the air at a ridiculous speed. I checked on my targets below and Martin. Martin had a prismatic barrier surrounding him and a little green imp that was running through the mist like it didn't exist. I looked at the three next and saw the mage looking directly at me. I saw him point and I flapped one wing. I almost avoided a bright beam of light that speared from the man's finger. I grit my teeth at the pain as my leg went numb. I cast Rejuvenate as I continued my ascent. The man tried to fire a few more beams at me, but I was able to dodge them. After 12 seconds I flipped over and dived straight at the man. I flapped the wings as fast as I could to add speed to my descent. The man was now frantically trying to fire finger lasers at me as I rocketed towards him. He couldn't run as his aura spell was only slowly pushing back the mist, and if he moved too quickly he would be lost. The little imps, there were now 5, were keeping the scout occupied. The big guy was howling in rage and swinging a mace in the mist. Another laser hit my shoulder and activated my shield. It drained 70 points from the shield as the man turned to run. I activated my wings again and powered straight at him, activating Area of Denial. The man turned and screamed as he burst with bright light. The spell blinded me as I slammed into the poor man at faster than terminal velocity. I like to call this move the poor man's ballistic missile. My staff tip sheared through some part of the man because I felt a tiny bit of resistance before I slammed into him with my shield. My impact left a crater in the ground and the displaced air flung the mist away in a 10-foot radius. I had to sit there as I was still blinded for another 5 seconds. I heard another scream coming from the direction the scout was last seen, and when my sight came back I turned to look. 10 imps were tearing the man apart. I turned back to look around me. The only thing left of the mage was an arm and part of his shoulder. The rest was splattered about, giving the mist a pink tinge in the area. I decided to leave the giant to Martin as I walked towards the other 4. The lead man had his eyes fixed on me with a big smile. He started clapping. "Thank you for the show and for saving me some work." These 3 were dead no matter what happened today. My steps halted as my mind seemed to lurch. "Wait where you are, we will deal with you after the fog clears." My mind felt like molasses as it was attacked by the man's spell. I managed another step forward and it felt like I was walking through thick mud. It was enough to get the man into identify range. Frederick DeWalt Psion level 18. I heard the man hiss to his cohorts. "He has a strong will, get in there and deal with him before he overwhelms my ability." I watched the 3 pull out weapons and they dismounted and ran into the fog towards me. I struggled against the man's ability as the 3 continued to close. They came unerringly toward me. That would only be possible if they had items that let them see through the mists. Fiona waited until the men were within 10 feet of me before she struck. She stabbed the Psion through the back and he let out a scream of pain. Immediately I felt the power dissipate around my mind as I blurred into motion. My first target was the fool that turned his head at the scream. I fed mana into my staff and activated Flurry, driving through his guard. He was quick, but I only needed to brush against his skin one time for my blinding pain enchantment to activate. He dropped his swords and screamed as the ability took hold. It was only amplified by the fact that he now had molten rock burning him in 3 spots. I bashed him upside the head as I spun to meet the next guy. The man attacked me with vigor, trying to break through my blocks. The other man was also running up to attack as well. Both men blurred and became 5 as they came at me. I jumped back, taking 3 hits to my shield before I stomped on the ground. Seismic strike rippled out from me, fire spewing from the cracks and burning away the false images as the real men stumbled. My staff shrunk as I activated the rune. I released it, causing the staff to shoot forward as I activated Stunning Gust. A large spike of molten rock rocketed off my staff and straight through one of the men's skulls. I will never forget the smell of cooking brain matter, I thought as I gagged. The last man was getting to his feet as I cast Earth Fist, breaking his kneecap. He went down screaming. I saw him glowing blue as the knee popped back into place. I couldn't let him keep healing. I rushed in and attacked. The man was a capable fighter, blocking my strikes and returning ones of his own. I managed to get Identify off while we battled. Colin Mimi Chris level 13. So he could mimic attacks. That explained why he was so quick to counter my fighting style and why he could use that mirror ability. I let the man slap my staff away like I was running out of steam and he took the bait, slashing forward with his sword. My shield took most of the blow as his sword cut across my torso. I latched onto his wrist and pulled him close as I activated Calcifying Strike. The man smashed my face with his forehead, causing my vision to go dizzy, but I held onto his weapon arm with one hand. With my other hand, I changed my staff into the mace and smashed it across his face. He screamed as all the active effects landed on his unprotected face. I kicked him away, causing him to stumble backward. He tried in vain to wipe the molten rock from his head. I released my shrink rune with both hands firmly on my staff as it shot forward, piercing through his throat. The man kept activating his damn healing aura as I stacked more and more damage upon him. His face was a ruin and the calcification had steadily crept up his arm, unable to be healed by his ability. I lifted my staff over my head and slammed it down with all my strength. I heard the crunch of his skull as the man's body went rigid. Blood leaked from his ears as he collapsed to the road like a marionette with his strings cut. I quickly checked on Fiona and Martin. Fiona was still battling the Psion. He must have some way to blunt her attacks if she was having this much trouble. Martin now had 25 of the green imps attacking the large man with the mace. The man just kept bellowing and slapping the things off of him. Each time he killed one, 2 more popped up. Well, that explains their numbers. I rushed to help Fiona. Stop, the voice shouted in my head, causing me to freeze momentarily. Fiona used the opportunity to strike out at the man again, fading back before he could retaliate. I slowly closed the distance as the man struggled to contend with both of us at once. Each time he froze me, Fiona attacked. As soon as he was forced to focus on her, I got a few steps closer. I activated my aura and the world turned red. I saw the man's eyes go wide and he tried to freeze me again, but this time it failed and I blink-stepped toward him, activating Flurry. He was forced to defend himself as a telekinetic shield snapped up. Each blow of my staff slammed into the shield, causing it to ring louder and louder. The man was bleeding from his nose as he held his hands out to keep the barrier active. Oh, how quickly they forget, I thought, as Fiona materialized in the space between his shield and the man's body. Her sword punched through his gut and into his heart. The man stumbled back, clutching at his chest before falling over dead. I dropped my aura and quickly cast heals on myself. It was still odd to me that Fiona's weapons left no visible mark. I still recall the feeling of her sword cutting into me in the cold. I looked toward Martin to see how his imps were doing. There was a literal mountain of them now, climbing and biting the giant of a man. His angry roars of protest were getting weaker as he slumped to his knees, the imps jumping all over him to get a piece for themselves. It was a slow, agonizing process to watch, but finally, the man fell to the ground. A few minutes later the mist cleared. Martin was still safe and unharmed in his dome. I did see a few scorch marks on the ground near him, from when the light mage had tried to attack him. We looted what remained of the bodies, tossing the remains into the swamp before we headed back to town. Martin said the gators would enjoy a nice snack. A bird that had been watching the entire fight flew off. Chapter 70, Appearances are deceiving. Frederick released his hold on the dominated bird, opening his eyes. The mission had ended in complete disaster. The fog prevented him from seeing most of the fight, but he saw enough to know that his homunculus had been killed. The magical construct had been a gift from his father, Baron Margoud de Walt. Of course, he had killed his father that same week and fled the country. Replacing the homunculus would be pricey and difficult. You couldn't just find a custom-tailored one in the bazaar. It had been an acceptable loss though, even if it had ended in death. Frederick wasn't surprised. The constructs could only mimic a few skills, which made them only as effective as a quarter of his actual level. He would miss the homunculus. It had allowed him to stay far from danger, a lesson he had learned from his father. Why do something yourself if you can get someone else to do it for you? Frederick took that lesson to heart. The others had been killed, but that was to be expected when engaging unknown enemies. The first 3 idiots were no loss, he could replace them. The other 3 had been loyal to him and he would feel that loss. He wasn't worried about what the boss would think. He had dominated the man early on and funneled all of the credits the group earned into his own pockets. It had allowed him to bankroll this whole expedition to the new human planet. The cost had been horrendous but worth it. He had uncovered agents of the kingdom snooping around the bandit group's city. After extracting information from one of the agents, he found out that they were looking for him and more were in or around the city. They knew of his skill set and would be able to counter it when they engaged him. That sparked his plan to leave. Before he left, he destroyed the minds of the remaining bandits, leaving them capable of only drooling while taking anything of value. This should slow down the investigators. He could simply set up his new kingdom in the town that the bazaar was located in, but there was no telling who would come through the portals. He knew that there were people far stronger than him in the system planets. The small town he had spotted from the dominated bird would have been an ideal target as it was off the beaten path and already had a wall around it. The problem with that was the three powerful individuals that had taken out his group. He couldn't scan them from the bird, but if they had managed to take down twice their number along with his construct, he needed to be wary. The phantom could be an issue. They were notoriously hard to hit or even kill. This one appeared to be able to take physical form, so it could be hit while in that form. It was obvious that the winged man was the leader. He could try and dominate the man, but if he had overcome the abilities he gave the homunculus, that could be a risky maneuver. He decided to see if any locals were amenable to taking over a town. There were always a few that were not content with the status quo. He would also keep an eye on the three that had attacked his men. The three of us returned to Armin. Martin waved his goodbye as he headed to report the situation to his sister. I didn't envy the man having to deal with that woman, even if it was his sister. Fiona and I returned to the tattoo parlor. The half-elf was long gone, only a note and a stack of credits left to show he had ever been here. I picked up the letter and read it. I know I promised to stay, but you can't possibly understand. I will not go back to those people. Hopefully, these credits will help you forget you ever saw me. The chip contained 2,000 credits. I pocketed the money. Now, I could simply forget about the man and let him go on his merry way, but I made a promise and I was sick of people lying to me. It took Fiona and me an hour to find the trail. Belarius had climbed over a section of the wall that wasn't actively patrolled. The reason for that was the dense swampy area outside that section. Bella grunted her displeasure at having to slog through the mud and water. She apparently had enough of that when she ran off during the banshee attack. The trail wasn't hard to find. The man had left a clear path through the floating vegetation and algae. I found him, Fiona said, floating up to me. I followed Fiona to where she found Belarius, or what was left of him. The system-modified alligators had a field day with the body. The only thing that remained was one arm, firmly gripped on an exposed root, and the upper part of his torso. His face was a mask of pain, frozen at the time of his death. I looked around to make sure there wasn't a gator lurking about. Fucking idiot, he should have just stayed in the village. Sounded like he was beyond afraid, Fiona replied. Well, if he had just trusted me to protect him, he wouldn't be gator food right now. Let's head back before I join him. Fiona nodded and we circled around to keep to the drier sections of the swamp, keeping our eyes peeled for any man-eating alligators. We made it back to the main trail without encountering anything. Bella stopped to shake the muck from her legs and I soothed her. We rode quietly back to Armin. I thought about what I said to Belarius before we left. I wasn't going to kill the man, probably. I would have likely just dragged the idiot back for his own good. This whole situation was fucked up. We couldn't even be sure that others wouldn't show up looking for their lost acquaintances. It was a problem for tomorrow, I thought, as we entered through the gate. 2 weeks went by quickly after the excitement with the outsiders. I spent the time perfecting my tattooing, deciding to take a break from fighting. It had gone much faster now that I had a mana engine to power the electric tattoo device. Even though my artistry had increased to the point that I was confident in my skills, I still wasn't looking forward to my first tattoo. The reason for that was the location I wanted the tattoo. I held the device in my hand as I stared at the mirror. I already had the design outlined around my eye. I had settled on a stylized version of the all-seeing eye that I tested many times before committing to this particular design. These runes were much more flexible in their interpretation than the Celtic runes or hieroglyphics. I chalked it up to the dozens of variations of the symbol. I touched the sharp needle to the design and started the process. The pain was intense and I had to grit my teeth and take it slow with plenty of stops. The magical ink I was using would fade to match the color of whatever it was used on. It had been designed for clothing, but I figured it would work well enough. While the color faded, if you looked close enough you could see an outline, and when in use it glowed a faint blue. I was about to touch the device to my face again as there was a loud pounding on the front door. "Fucking hell!" I exclaimed, barely keeping my hand from jabbing the sharp needle into my eye. I put the device down as I stomped towards the door. "This better be fucking good," I yelled loud enough for my visitor to hear. When I wrenched the door open, Martin was standing there. "Martin, what the hell, did you not see the do not disturb sign? You almost made me poke my eye out." "Sorry, I wouldn't disturb you if it wasn't important." "Well, spit it out, I was kind of in the middle of something," I said, gesturing to my eye. "Wah, no, I'll ask you about that later. This is about the visitors from a few weeks ago. I drove past the area on my patrol and decided to check and make sure the bodies were eaten. That's when I found this," he said, walking to the quad with something wrapped in a tarp. "It looked like a body. Is it a body?" "Yes, but that's not the strange part, there were a few other body parts that the gators hadn't finished off completely yet. They didn't touch this body, and there is no decay on the corpse. How is that possible for something that sat in a swamp for 2 weeks?" I rubbed my temple. "I don't know, Martin, I'm not a coroner. Isn't there someone else you can take this to?" "Nobody in town has the qualifications. I thought that with your enchanting and whatnot maybe you would take a look." I sighed. "Fine, bring it around back, there is a picnic table back there I don't use and the backyard is fenced in." Martin nodded quickly before jumping back on the quad and driving around back. "Any ideas?" I asked Fiona, who quietly watched the whole interaction. "Nope. Thanks," I grumbled as I headed to the backyard to let Martin in. I heard her giggle quietly and I just shook my head. I unlocked the gate and waited for Martin to circle the block. I heard him coming a minute later. He came through the gate with his package and I shut and locked it behind us. "All right, let's get this over with," I said, helping Martin unload the body from the quad and place it onto the table. He unwrapped the body of the psion. Now I wasn't an expert on decomposition but I expected a 2-week-old corpse to show some signs of decay or bloating. The body looked like it was just sleeping, seeing as it had no wounds. Fiona's strikes leaving no physical damage to it. "Hey," I said examining the body. Other than being cold to the touch there was no sign of rigor mortis, not that I knew if a 2-week-old corpse should have rigor mortis or not. "Wait here, I'll be right back." I headed into the house to get a knife from the kitchen. I also grabbed a plastic apron from the tattoo parlor to keep blood off my clothes. "Hope you don't get queasy," I said, handing Martin a hammer. What's this for?" "Well, we're going to have to crack this body open if we want to find out anything more. You may need the hammer to break the ribs, I don't have a saw." "Oh," was all the response I got. I shrugged, handing the man another apron. I took the sharp carving knife and cut a Y shape in the chest as I had seen on so many medical and cop dramas. The first thing I noticed was the skin, it felt odd as I cut through it. After killing so many people you get a feel for the resistance of stabbing someone. This skin, while it looked real, felt like rubber. Blood spilled out of the corpse. Now I knew that wasn't normal for a dead body. The blood should have pooled and congealed. After the last of the blood emptied into the grass, I dived back into the corpse. That was where things got interesting. Martin looked into the cavity. What the heck? The body definitely wasn't human, or alive. The tiny monohearts embedded into the pseudo-organs were kind of a dead giveaway. It was easy to tell that the organs were built. Rings of what looked like mithril were wrapped in complex enchantments and attached to each organ. I ripped each out and set it next to the body. There were a pair of lungs, heart, kidneys, liver, stomach, and even intestines. A thick web of what felt like spider silk but stronger held the organs in their proper place. It took some finagling but we managed to get into the skull. The brain was a distorted orb made in the shape of a human brain. It was made from pure mithril and had thousands of tiny enchantments placed on it. Well, I don't know what this thing is but it wasn't alive. I can tell you from the materials and craftsmanship that it was created by a master of the craft. I tried running identify on the body but got the same information from before. I tried it on the body parts to see if I got something different. Homunculus brain. Identify says the body is who we fought but when I identified the brain it came back as a homunculus brain. Any clue? Fiona and Martin shook their heads. I had a vague idea what a homunculus was, from Earth stories but needed to verify it with someone more knowledgeable. I stored the organs in my ring, along with the corpse. I'm going to have to go to the bazaar again to get some answers. Fiona, you stay here with Martin. We can't guarantee that the man that this thing was designed to mimic isn't still out there. You sure it's a good idea to go alone? Martin asked. I smiled, I'm not alone, I'll have Bella.